They came for her at midnight, 13 armed men surrounding a ranch that had already buried 3 women who couldn't survive its brutality. But Lenora Vance wasn't like the others. She'd tamed a killer horse with nothing but patience and stolen evidence that could destroy an empire built on lies. Now the men who'd murdered her father wanted her dead, and the stubborn rancher she'd gambled everything on had to choose: surrender the woman who'd changed his godforsaken ranch forever, or start a war that would paint the frontier red. Stick around until the end of this story, hit that like button, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this tale travels. The sky over Hayes Ranch looked like hammered steel the afternoon Lenora Vance arrived, gray, cold, and threatening violence. Coulter Hayes stood on his porch watching dust rise from the eastern trail, one hand resting on the post his father had carved 40 years back. He'd posted that advertisement 6 weeks ago, nailed it to every trading post and saloon between here and Denver. Wife wanted. Hard ranch. Harder winters. Weak women need not apply. 3 had tried already. The banker's daughter from Cheyenne lasted 4 hours before her father came thundering back with lawyers. The widow from Kansas made it 2 days, then left in the middle of the night without even taking her bags. The schoolteacher stayed almost a week, which impressed Coulter right up until he found her weeping in the chicken coop, too terrified to collect eggs because the rooster had spurred her hand. His foreman, Wade Garrett, joined him on the porch, squinting at the approaching rider. "Another one?" Wade asked. "Looks like." "Want me to tell the boys to clean up their language?" Coulter snorted. "Won't matter. She'll be gone before supper." But as the rider drew closer, something felt different. For one thing, this wasn't some delicate thing perched side saddle on a borrowed mare. This was a lone figure on a rangy paint horse, sitting the saddle like someone who'd been born there. The rider wore men's clothes, worn denim, a battered coat, and a hat pulled low enough to hide most of their face. Wade straightened slightly. "That's a woman?" "Hell if I know." The rider pulled up 20 feet from the porch, and the horse stood quiet despite having just covered hard miles. That alone told Coulter something about whoever was in that saddle. You didn't get a horse to settle that fast unless you knew what you were doing. The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion, then finally looked up. A woman. Definitely. Maybe late 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a simple braid and eyes the color of creek water over stones, gray-green and sharp enough to cut. She had a smudge of trail dust across one cheekbone and the kind of lean build that came from work, not vanity. She didn't smile, didn't curtsy or bat her eyes or do any of the ridiculous things the other women had tried. She just met Coulter's stare dead on and said, "You Coulter Hayes?" "That'd be me. I'm here about the position." Wade coughed to cover a laugh. "The wife position?" Her gaze shifted to him, cool and measuring. "You got another one advertised I don't know about?" Wade's grin faltered. Coulter stepped off the porch, boots hitting dirt that hadn't seen rain in 3 weeks. "What's your name?" "Lenora Vance." "Where you from, Miss Vance?" "East of here." She didn't elaborate. "That's not much of an answer." "It's the one you're getting." Something flickered in Coulter's chest. Not quite amusement, not quite annoyance. The advertisement mentioned this as hard country. I can read. Winters here will freeze a woman solid if she's not careful. Work never stops. Ranch hands aren't exactly gentlemen. You'd be cooking for 15 men, managing the house, helping with livestock when we're short-handed. "Oh, I didn't ride 3 days to hear a list of chores, Mr. Hayes." Lenora's voice stayed level, but there was steel underneath. "I'm not some city girl looking for adventure. I know what ranch work costs. Question is, are you going to give me a chance to prove it, or waste both our time explaining why I can't?" Wade made a choking sound. Coulter studied her for a long moment. She didn't fidget, didn't look away, just stood there like she'd already decided she belonged and was waiting for him to catch up. "All right," he said finally. "You want a chance? I'll give you one." "What kind of test?" Coulter nodded towards the main corral, where a massive black stallion paced along the far fence. "That horse has put 3 experienced cowboys in the infirmary, one still limping. I've been trying to break him for 2 months, and he's only gotten meaner. You get him to let you touch him without using a rope or whip. The job's yours." Lenora's gaze followed his gesture. For the first time, something shifted in her expression. Not fear exactly, but recognition. Like she understood the stakes. "And when I do it?" she asked. "If you do it," Wade muttered. She ignored him. When I do it, I need your word you won't go back on the offer just because it wasn't what you expected. Coulter raised an eyebrow. My word's good. Then we have a deal. She handed her horse's reins to Wade, who took them automatically, looking baffled, and walked toward the corral without another word. By now, half the ranch hands had noticed the commotion and were drifting over from the bunkhouse and barn. Coulter recognized the expressions: skepticism, amusement, and in a few cases, something uglier. Most of these men had worked under him for years. They were decent enough when sober, but ranch life didn't exactly attract gentle souls. "Who's the girl?" called out Amos, a stocky cowhand with a scar splitting his left eyebrow. "Says she's here for the wife job," Wade answered. That got laughs. "Boss is letting her try the black demon," Wade added. The laughter died fast. "Jesus," someone muttered. "That horse'll kill her." Coulter almost stopped her then. The stallion had been wild-caught from the mountains last spring, probably 6 years old, never handled, and mean as a cornered rattlesnake. Coulter had bought him cheap from a trader who'd given up, thinking he could gentle the animal through patience and skill. Instead, the horse had gone through the corral fence twice, broken a man's ribs with one well-placed kick, and bitten clean through another cowboy's forearm hard enough to leave scars. But something made Coulter hold his tongue as Lenora approached the corral gate. She didn't hesitate, didn't pause to gather courage or psych herself up. Just unlatched the gate, stepped inside, and closed it behind her with a quiet click. The stallion's head snapped up immediately. He'd been pacing the far side, all coiled muscle and barely contained violence. Now he swung around to face her, ears pinned flat, nostrils flaring. Even from 30 feet away, Coulter could see the tension rippling through the animal's body, that split second before an explosion. Lenora stood completely still, not frozen, not terrified, just still. The stallion took one step toward her, then another. His hooves hit the dirt with enough force to send up small puffs of dust. He lowered his head slightly, neck arched, watching her with eyes that had gone hard and wild. Several of the ranch hands shifted nervously. One reached for a rope. "Hold," Coulter said quietly. The stallion circled left, testing. Lenora turned with him, keeping her body angled sideways, not directly facing him. She kept her hands loose at her sides, her breathing slow and visible even from where Coulter stood. "She's going to get herself killed," Amos whispered. But she didn't move, not when the horse charged forward 3 steps, then stopped. Not when he reared up slightly, front hooves slashing air. Not when he tossed his head and snorted loud enough to make one of the younger hands flinch. She just stood there, waiting. And slowly, impossibly, the stallion's ears began to shift forward. It took maybe 20 minutes, maybe longer. Time seemed to stretch and warp inside that corral, measured only by the horse's gradual shift from predator to something else. Something curious. Lenora never rushed, never reached out too soon. When she finally extended one hand, it was palm down, fingers relaxed, offering nothing but patience. The stallion stretched his neck toward her. His nose touched her hand. Several men exhaled at once. Lenora stood there another full minute, letting the horse investigate her scent, her stillness, her complete lack of fear. Then, moving slower than frost forming on glass, she lifted her other hand and rested it against the horse's neck. The stallion trembled, but he didn't bolt. "I'll be damned," Wade breathed. 10 minutes later, Lenora had her fingers in the horse's mane. 5 minutes after that, she was walking beside him as he followed her around the corral like a dog on an invisible leash. By the time she led him to the gate, every man on the ranch was watching in dead silence. Coulter opened the gate himself. Lenora walked through, the stallion stepping carefully behind her, and brought him to a stop in front of Coulter. Up close, the horse's eyes had gone soft, still alert, but no longer wild. "Your test," Lenora said quietly. "I'm done." Coulter looked at the horse, looked at her, tried to figure out what the hell he'd just witnessed. "How'd you do that?" he asked. "Listen to what he was telling me." She stroked the stallion's neck once more, then stepped back. "He's not mean. He's terrified. Probably got hurt when they caught him. Then every person who tried to handle him after that just made it worse. All he needed was someone willing to wait instead of force." Wade let out a low whistle. "Boss, you seeing this?" Coulter nodded slowly. "Yeah, I'm seeing it." Lenora met his eyes. "Do I have the job?" Every practical instinct Coulter owned screamed at him to say no. This woman was trouble. He could feel it in his bones. She'd shown up out of nowhere, refused to explain where she came from, and just accomplished something none of his experienced men could manage. That wasn't normal. That was someone running from something or hiding secrets deep enough to drown in. But he'd given his word. "You've got the job," he said. $30 a month, room in the main house, 3 meals a day. You work dawn to dusk, same as everyone else. Sundays off unless there's emergency livestock work. Wedding can wait until spring if you want time to settle in. Something flickered across Lenora's face. Relief, maybe, or exhaustion so deep it had carved itself into her bones. "Spring's fine," she said. "I'll need to put my horse up first. Wade'll show you the barn. I'll have someone bring your things to the house." She nodded once, then followed Wade toward the stables, the black stallion trailing peacefully behind her like a shadow. Coulter watched her go, a bad feeling settling in his gut like spoiled meat. Amos sidled up next to him. "Boss, you sure about this? Woman shows up out of nowhere, won't say where she's from, just happens to be some kind of horse whisperer. I gave my word." "Yeah, but—" "I gave my word," Coulter repeated, harder this time. "She earned the job fair. That's the end of it." But it wasn't the end of it. Not by a long shot. That night, after supper, which Lenora had cooked with the same quiet efficiency she'd shown with the horse, Coulter found her standing on the porch, staring at the eastern road. Not looking at the sunset, which was painting the western sky in shades of copper and blood. Looking east, toward whatever she'd left behind. "Something out there?" Coulter asked, stepping outside. She didn't startle, just glanced at him, then back at the road. "Old habit? Watching the road?" "Watching my back." Coulter leaned against the porch rail. The temperature had dropped fast after sundown, and frost was already starting to silver the dirt. "You want to tell me what you're running from?" "No." "Fair enough." He pulled his coat tighter. "But if trouble's coming to my ranch, I'd appreciate some warning before it shows up." Lenora was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was low enough he almost missed it. "If it comes, you'll know." She turned to face him fully. "And if it does, Mr. Hayes, you should probably get as far from me as possible, because the kind of trouble I bring doesn't ask questions before it starts killing people." Then she walked back inside, leaving Coulter alone with the cold and a certainty that hiring Lenora Vance might be the best or worst decision he'd ever made. He just couldn't tell which yet. The first week passed without incident. Lenora worked harder than any woman Coulter had ever met. Hell, harder than most of the men. She was up before dawn cooking breakfast for 15 hungry cowboys, spent the day cleaning, mending, managing supplies, and doing a dozen other tasks that kept the ranch running. Then after supper, she'd disappear into the barn for an hour to work with the black stallion, who she'd started calling Ash. The men didn't know what to make of her. She didn't flirt or gossip or try to charm anyone. She just worked. When someone spoke to her, she answered direct. When they didn't, she left them alone. She wore men's clothes most of the time, easier for the work, and kept her hair pulled back tight enough to give Coulter a headache just looking at it. But she was competent. Damn near brilliant, actually. The food improved. The house stopped feeling like a place men just slept between shifts. And Ash, the stallion everyone had written off as unsalvageable, was already gentling under her hands. Wade started calling her the miracle worker behind her back, which Coulter figured was meant as a compliment. But every night, Lenora watched the eastern road like she expected the devil himself to come riding out of the darkness. It was wearing on Coulter's nerves. On the 8th night, he found her in the barn after supper, brushing Ash down while the stallion dozed contentedly. "You ever planning to tell me the truth?" Coulter asked from the doorway. Lenora didn't look up. "About what?" "About why you're here. About what you're running from. About why you check every window before dark and keep a knife under your pillow." That got her attention. "How'd you know about the knife?" "Changed the linens in your room yesterday. Felt the handle when I was tucking in the blanket." Coulter stepped into the barn, closing the door behind him. "Look, I'm not trying to pry, but I've got 15 men depending on this ranch for their livelihoods. If something's coming that'll put them in danger, I need to know." Lenora set down the brush. Ash huffed softly, sensing the shift in her mood. "You really want to know?" she asked. "Yeah, I do." She was quiet for a long time, one hand resting on Ash's shoulder like she needed the contact to stay grounded. When she finally spoke, her voice was flat, the kind of flat that came from repeating a story until all the emotion had been wrung out of it. I'm from a ranch about 200 miles east of here, smaller than yours. My father built it from nothing over 30 years. Good land, water rights, decent herd. We weren't rich, but we did all right. Coulter waited. 3 years ago, some businessmen out of Denver started buying up land in our territory. They called it development, said they were bringing progress and civilization. What they really brought was forged documents, bribed officials, and enough hired guns to make people too scared to fight back. Land fraud, Coulter said quietly. Massive land fraud. They'd show up with paperwork claiming they owned property that families had worked for generations. If you fought them, suddenly your deed would go missing from the county records, or a judge would rule against you, or your barn would burn down in the middle of the night. Ash shifted, picking up on Lenora's tension. She stroked his neck absently. My father tried to fight them legally, hired a lawyer, filed complaints, got witnesses to testify. He was so sure the system would work if he just followed the rules. Her voice cracked slightly. They killed him for it. Made it look like a riding accident, but everyone knew. And after he died, my mother couldn't hold on to the ranch. She lost everything, the land, the house, the livestock, everything. Jesus, Coulter breathed. I couldn't let it go. Couldn't just walk away and pretend it didn't matter. Lenora's hand tightened on Ash's mane. So I did something stupid. I got myself hired as a clerk in their main office in Denver. Spent 8 months keeping my head down, filing papers, making coffee, being invisible. And while I did that, I copied documents, ledgers, correspondence, evidence proving they'd stolen land from 17 different families across 3 territories. Understanding hit Coulter like a fist to the gut. And then you ran. And then I ran. Because once they realized what I'd taken, they put a bounty on my head big enough to make every tracker and hired gun between here and the Mississippi start looking for me. She finally turned to face him. So yes, Mr. Hayes, trouble's coming. Maybe not today, maybe not next week, but eventually someone's going to figure out where I went, and when they do, they won't come asking politely. Coulter processed that. These documents you stole, where are they now? Hidden, safe. Can they actually prove the fraud? Every bit of it. Names, dates, amounts paid in bribes, which officials were bought, which deeds were forged. Everything. Lenora's jaw tightened. Enough to put some very powerful men in prison for a very long time, which is exactly why they want me dead. Why not just go to the authorities, turn over the evidence? To who? The sheriff they bribed? The judge on their payroll? The territorial governor who accepted campaign contributions from them? Lenora shook her head. The system doesn't work when the people running it are corrupt. I learned that watching my father die believing in it. Coulter rubbed his jaw, thinking hard. This was worse than he'd imagined. Not just trouble, a whole goddamn war waiting to explode. Any sane man would tell her to leave immediately. Instead, he asked, how many men are we talking about? If they come. Lenora blinked. What? If they find you here, how many men would they send? I don't know. 10, 15? Enough to make sure I don't walk away alive. She stared at him. Mr. Hayes, you're not seriously considering Coulter. If we're going to be married and possibly die together, you should probably call me Coulter. A sound escaped her that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. You're insane. I just told you I'm being hunted by people who murder families for profit, and you're worried about what I call you? I'm worried about a lot of things right now, Coulter said honestly. But mostly, I'm worried about whether 15 ranch hands and one stubborn woman can hold off a group of hired killers if it comes to that. Why would you even try? You could just tell me to leave. Be rid of the problem. Coulter considered that. It was a fair question. You ever hear the story about my father? He asked instead. No. He built this ranch 40 years ago. First winter here, raiders hit the place. Comanche, I think, though he never was totally sure. Killed half the hands, burned the original house, ran off most of the livestock. Everyone told him to give up, move somewhere safer, but he didn't. You know why? Lenora shook her head. Because he'd already decided this land was his, and once my father decided something belonged to him, he'd burn the whole territory down before he let someone take it. Coulter met her eyes. I'm my father's son. You earned your place here fair and square. That makes you part of this ranch, and I don't give up what's mine just because someone threatens me." For the first time since she'd arrived, Lenora's composure cracked. Her eyes went bright with tears she refused to let fall. "You're going to get yourself killed," she whispered. "Maybe, but I'll die knowing I stood for something." He tilted his head. "Besides, you tamed Ash in 20 minutes. Figure if anyone can help us survive what's coming, it's you." That got a watery laugh out of her. "I need to tell the men," Coulter continued. "Give them a choice. Some might leave, and that's their right. But the ones who stay deserve to know what they're staying for." Lenora nodded slowly. "When?" "Tomorrow, after breakfast." He headed for the door, then paused. "Lenora, those documents you hid, they really enough to destroy these men?" "Yes." "Good. Because if we're going to war, I want to make damn sure we can win it." The next morning, Coulter gathered every man on the ranch in the main yard after breakfast. 15 faces stared back at him. Weathered, suspicious, curious. These men had worked for him through droughts, harsh winters, and enough backbreaking labor to kill softer souls. They trusted him, and he was about to test that trust harder than he ever had before. Lenora stood beside him, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "All right," Coulter started. "I'm going to tell you something, and then I'm going to give you a choice. Listen to the whole thing before you decide." He told them everything, about the land fraud, about Lenora's family, about the evidence she'd stolen and the men hunting her, about the very real possibility that violence was coming to Hayes Ranch whether they liked it or not. When he finished, the silence was thick enough to choke on. Finally, Amos spoke up. "How long before they find her?" "Could be weeks. Could be months," Lenora answered. "But they will find me eventually. These men have resources I can't match forever." "And you want us to fight them?" another hand asked. Charlie, a quiet kid from Missouri who'd only been on the ranch 6 months. "I want you to make your own choice," Coulter said. "Any man who wants to leave, I'll pay you through the end of the month plus an extra week's wages. No hard feelings, but anyone who stays needs to understand what they're signing up for." "What about the law?" Wade asked. "Can't we get the territorial marshal involved?" "The law's bought," Lenora said bluntly. "Half the officials in 3 territories are taking bribes from these men. Going to the authorities means signing my death warrant." More silence. Then a grizzled older cowhand named Dutch spoke up. "This evidence you got, it really enough to hang him?" "Yes." "And if we help you survive long enough to get it to someone honest, those families get their land back?" Lenora hesitated. "Maybe. If we can find the right lawyer, the right judge, if we can stay alive long enough to testify." Dutch spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "My brother lost his homestead to land fraud in Kansas 5 years back. Bankrupted his whole family. He died still owing money on property he never really lost legal-like." He looked at Coulter. "I'll stay. And I'll fight." One by one, other men spoke up. Some stayed because they trusted Coulter. Some because they'd been victims of similar fraud elsewhere. Some because they'd finally found something worth fighting for beyond wages and routine. But 4 men chose to leave. Coulter paid them fair, shook their hands, and watched them ride out by noon. That left 11 men. 11 against however many would come. Lenora watched the departing riders with guilt written all over her face. "This is my fault," she said quietly. "No," Coulter said. "This is the fault of men who think they can steal from people without consequences. We're just here to prove them wrong." Wade walked up, rifle already in hand. "Boss, we should start preparing. Board up windows, stockpile ammunition, set up watch rotations." "Do it," Coulter agreed. "And Wade, make sure everyone knows how to shoot. If this goes bad, I don't want anyone hesitating because they're not sure which end of a gun to hold." Over the next 3 days, Hayes Ranch transformed into something resembling a fortress. They boarded lower windows, set up barricades, established firing positions with clear sightlines. Dutch, who'd served in the army before drifting west, organized the men into defensive positions and ran drills until everyone knew exactly where to be if shooting started. Lenora worked alongside them, her guilt driving her to exhaustion. She hauled lumber, filled sandbags, and helped inventory ammunition with a focus that worried Coulter. She was pushing herself too hard, running on fumes and determination. On the 4th night, Coulter found her in the barn again, sitting in Ash's stall with her back against the wall. She wasn't crying, but she looked hollowed out, like something vital had been scraped away from her insides. "You should sleep," Coulter said. "Can't." He sat down beside her. Ash, who'd fully bonded with Lenora by now, huffed softly and lay down nearby, an incredible show of trust from an animal that had been feral weeks ago. "This isn't your fault," Coulter said. "You already told me that. Figured it bears repeating since you clearly didn't believe me the first time." Lenora leaned her head back against the stall wall. 4 men left because of me. 4 men who might have stayed and lived if I hadn't shown up. 4 men who made their own choice, Coulter corrected. Same as the 11 who stayed. You didn't force anyone into this, Lenora. Stop carrying guilt that doesn't belong to you. Easy to say. Never said it was easy, just said it was true. He was quiet for a moment. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why didn't you just destroy the evidence? Burn it, bury it, throw it in a river. Take away the reason they're hunting you. Lenora turned to look at him. Would you? Would I what? If you had proof that could get justice for 17 families who'd lost everything, would you destroy it to save yourself? Coulter thought about that. Thought about his father who'd died defending this land against raiders. Thought about the men who'd stayed despite knowing violence was coming. No, he admitted. I guess I wouldn't. There's your answer then. Lenora's voice went soft. Those families deserve their land back. They deserve to know the people who destroyed their lives will face consequences. And I'm the only person who can make that happen. So no, I won't destroy the evidence, even if it gets me killed. You're stubborn as hell, you know that? So are you. That's why this is probably going to work. Coulter smiled despite everything. What's going to work? This. She gestured vaguely at the barn, the ranch, the whole impossible situation. Whatever we're doing here. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to Ash's steady breathing and the distant sounds of men on watch patrol. Finally, Coulter said, When this is over, assuming we survive, what then? What do you want? Lenora considered the question seriously. Honestly, I don't know. I've been running and planning and surviving for so long, I forgot how to think past tomorrow. We'll start thinking about it, because we are going to survive, and when we do, you'll need to figure out what comes next. Is this you proposing again? Lenora asked, a hint of amusement in her voice. This is me reminding you that you've got a future worth planning for. Coulter stood, offering her his hand. Come on, you need actual sleep, not whatever this is. She took his hand and let him pull her up. Coulter? Yeah? Thank you for not throwing me out, for believing this matters. It does matter, he said simply, and you're welcome. They walked back to the house together under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. Neither of them mentioned that this might be one of the last peaceful nights they'd ever have. The attack came 6 days later. Coulter was checking fence line on the western pasture when he saw the dust. Too much dust for a single rider, too organized to be wild horses. His gut clenched. He wheeled his horse around and rode hard for the ranch, counting riders as they emerged from the heat shimmer. 10, 12. No, 13 men, all armed, moving with the kind of precision that meant military training or worse. He made it back to the ranch 2 minutes before the riders arrived. Positions! Coulter shouted, hitting the ground running. Wade, get Lenora inside. Dutch, you've got the barn. Everyone else, you know your spots. Men scattered like buckshot, grabbing rifles and taking cover behind the barricades they'd built. Lenora appeared on the porch, rifle already in hand, face pale but determined. Inside, Coulter ordered. No. Lenora, I said no. They came for me. I'm not hiding while you fight my battle. There wasn't time to argue. The riders had reached the edge of the property and stopped in a loose line, close enough to be threatening but far enough to avoid immediate gunfire. The man in front sat his horse like someone used to command. Expensive clothes, expensive gun, face like carved granite and eyes cold enough to freeze water. Coulter Hayes, he called out. I'm here on behalf of Mr. Edmund Voss of the Voss Development Company. We're looking for a woman who stole property belonging to our organization. We have reason to believe she's on your ranch. Coulter stepped into the open, rifle held loose but ready. Property? You mean a person? I mean documents that don't belong to her. Return them and the woman and we'll leave peacefully. Refuse, and the man gestured at the armed riders behind him. Well, I think you understand the alternative. I understand you're threatening me on my own land, Coulter said evenly. That doesn't sit well with me. This isn't a negotiation, Mr. Hayes. We know Lenora Vance is here. We've been tracking her for weeks. She stole valuable property, and we intend to recover it. Those valuable properties are evidence of crimes, Lenora called out, stepping forward despite Coulter's warning glare. Fraud, bribery, murder, and you're just hired guns too stupid or too greedy to care. The lead writer's expression didn't change. Miss Vance, how convenient. You can save everyone a lot of trouble by coming with us now. Go to hell. That's unfortunate. The man sighed like he was disappointed. Mr. Hayes, I'm going to give you one more chance. Surrender Miss Vance and the documents, or my men will burn this ranch to the ground with everyone in it. You have 60 seconds to decide. Coulter felt his men tense behind their barricades, felt the weight of the moment pressing down like a physical thing. Then Lenora did something that shocked everyone. She stepped fully into the open, hands raised slightly, and smiled. You want the documents? She called out. They're already gone. The lead writer frowned. What? I sent copies to 3 different lawyers in 3 different cities over a week ago. Sealed envelopes with instructions to open them and deliver the contents to the territorial marshal if I don't contact them by the end of the month. Lenora's voice carried clear and confident across the yard. So go ahead. Kill me. Burn the ranch. But the second I disappear, every crime your boss has committed gets exposed publicly. Every bribe, every forged deed, every family you destroyed, it all comes out. Silence. Coulter watched the lead writer's face carefully, watched uncertainty flicker across those cold eyes for the first time. You're bluffing, the man said, but his voice had lost its certainty. Am I? You willing to bet Edmund Voss's freedom on it? Lenora took a step forward. Because I promise you, the moment those documents go public, every official you've bribed will turn on you to save themselves, and your boss will be in prison before the week's out. The writers shifted nervously. Even from this distance, Coulter could see them exchanging glances, calculating odds. The lead writer stared at Lenora for a long, tense moment. Then, incredibly, he turned his horse around. We're leaving, he announced to his men. But this isn't over, Miss Vance. Eventually, you'll make a mistake, and when you do, we'll be there. Looking forward to it, Lenora said, her voice steady despite the tremor Coulter could see in her hands. The 13 riders turned and rode away, dust rising in their wake like smoke from a battlefield that never happened. Nobody moved until they were completely out of sight. Then Wade let out a shaky breath. Did that just work? Lenora's legs gave out. Coulter caught her before she hit the ground, lowering her to sit on the porch steps. Easy, he murmured. You're okay. It's over. It's not over, Lenora gasped, her whole body shaking with adrenaline crash. I lied. There are no lawyers, no copies. I just gambled everything on a bluff, and somehow it worked. Coulter stared at her. You what? I was desperate. I thought if I could make them believe the evidence was already out there, they'd have to back off, at least temporarily. She looked up at him with wild eyes. I just bought us time, that's all. They'll verify the lie eventually, and then they'll come back worse than before. For a moment, Coulter didn't know whether to laugh or shake her. He settled for pulling her into a tight hug while his heart tried to hammer its way out of his chest. You, he said into her hair, are the bravest and most reckless woman I have ever met. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. You just saved all our lives with nothing but words and nerve. He pulled back to look at her. But now we've got work to do. What kind of work? Coulter helped her stand, his mind already racing ahead. The kind where we take your lie and make it truth. Because if copies of that evidence in lawyers' hands is what keeps you safe, then that's exactly what we're going to do. Lenora's eyes widened. You mean, we're going to find every witness we can, build the strongest case possible, and we're going to make sure Edmund Voss and everyone like him faces justice for what they've done. Coulter looked at his men, who were emerging from their positions, faces showing a mix of relief and lingering fear. What do you say, boys? Feel like taking down some corrupt businessmen? Dutch grinned, showing tobacco-stained teeth. Hell yes, boss. One by one, the others nodded agreement. And just like that, Hayes Ranch stopped being a fortress and became something else entirely. The starting point for a war that would shake the frontier to its foundations. That night, nobody slept much. The men stayed on rotating watch, 2 at a time, rifles loaded and eyes scanning the darkness for any sign the riders had circled back. Coulter knew they wouldn't, not yet anyway. The bluff had bought them time, but exactly how much was anyone's guess. He found Lenora in the kitchen just after midnight, making coffee she didn't need with hands that still trembled slightly. "You should rest," he said. "So should you." She poured 2 cups without asking, sliding one across the table to him. "But here we are." Coulter accepted the coffee and sat down heavily. His body ached from tension that hadn't fully released, muscles still coiled tight like he was waiting for gunfire that never came. "We need to move fast," Lenora said quietly. "Once they verify I was lying about the lawyers, they'll come back with more men. Maybe burn us out from a distance. Maybe just shoot anyone who steps outside." "I know. So what's the plan?" "You said we'd make the lie true, but that means traveling, finding lawyers who aren't corrupt, convincing witnesses to testify against men who've already destroyed their lives once." She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "That's not going to be easy. Nothing worth doing ever is." Coulter took a long drink, letting the heat burn down his throat. "First thing tomorrow, we figure out where the evidence actually is. Then we make copies, multiple copies, distribute them to people we can trust in different locations. I hid the originals in a mining camp about 40 miles north, a place called Silver Ridge. There's an old prospector there who owes my father a debt. He's been keeping a locked box for me, doesn't know what's in it. Can we trust him? He's half-deaf, barely literate, and hates anyone wearing fancy clothes. Yeah, we can trust him." Lenore managed a tired smile. "But getting there means leaving the ranch vulnerable. And once we have the documents, we need to find lawyers and witnesses scattered across 3 territories. That could take months." Coulter drummed his fingers on the table, thinking. "Wade can hold things here with Dutch and the others. They're good men. But you're right. We'll need help with the rest." "What kind of help?" "The kind that knows the territory, knows which officials are honest, and knows how to move without attracting attention from men like Voss's hired guns." He met her eyes. "I know someone. Former territorial marshal, retired now, lives in Carson Springs about 3 days' ride west. If anyone can point us toward honest lawyers and help us build a case, it's him." "You trust him?" "With my life. He's the one who helped my father establish legal claim to this ranch 40 years ago, when half the territory was trying to steal it through fraud. Sound familiar?" Coulter's mouth twisted. "Man named Jacob Thorne. Stubborn old bastard, but he knows how the system works and who's worth a damn in it." Lenora nodded slowly. "Then that's where we start. Silver Ridge first to retrieve the evidence, then Carson Springs to find this Marshall friend of yours. We leave in 2 days. That gives us time to prepare and make sure the ranch is secure before we go." "2 days?" Lenora echoed, and something in her voice made Coulter look at her more carefully. She looked exhausted, worn down to the studs. But underneath that, he saw something else, a kind of desperate hope that scared him because he knew how badly hope could hurt when it got crushed. "We're going to make this work," he said, more confidently than he felt. "You don't know that." "No, but I know we're going to try our damnedest, and that's going to have to be enough." Lenora studied him for a long moment, then reached across the table and squeezed his hand once, quick and almost shy. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for not giving up on this. On me. Thank you for being crazy enough to ride into a storm you could have avoided." Coulter squeezed back, then released her hand before the moment could get too heavy. "Now go get some sleep. We've got a long couple of days ahead." She went, taking her coffee with her. Coulter sat alone in the kitchen listening to the house settle and creak, and wondered how a simple advertisement for a ranch wife had turned into a full-scale war against corruption that could get everyone he cared about killed. But he didn't regret it, not even a little. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. Wade organized the remaining men into defensive positions and watch rotations that would hold the ranch secure even with Coulter and Lenora gone. Dutch took inventory of ammunition and supplies, marking everything in the careful handwriting that always surprised people who didn't know him well. Charlie, the young hand from Missouri, turned out to be decent with carpentry and reinforced the barn doors with extra bracing. Lenora spent most of her time with Ash, working the stallion through exercises that would prepare him for long-distance travel. The horse had transformed completely under her care, still spirited and strong, but responsive now. trusting. Watching them together made Coulter think about wildness and how it didn't always need to be broken, just understood. On the second evening, Wade cornered Coulter near the bunkhouse. "You sure about this, boss?" Wade asked, keeping his voice low. "Leaving with just her? Those riders could be watching the road. Could ambush you before you make it 20 miles. I know the risks." "Do you?" Wade's weathered face was serious. "Because I'm starting to think this is about more than just helping her fight fraud. You're getting attached to that woman, and attached makes a man stupid." Coulter bristled. "I'm doing what's right. Maybe. Or maybe you're doing what feels right because you've been alone on this ranch too long, and she's the first woman who's looked at you like you're worth a damn." Wade held up a hand before Coulter could respond. "I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying go in with your eyes open. She's trouble, Coulter. Brave trouble, sure. The kind of trouble that makes you want to charge into gunfire just to prove you're worthy of her. But trouble all the same." "You finished?" "Yeah, I'm finished." Wade clapped him on the shoulder. "Just be careful out there, and come back alive, you hear? This ranch needs you." "I'll come back," Coulter promised, hoping it was true. They left at dawn on the third day. Coulter rode his usual buckskin gelding, reliable, steady, built for distance. Lenora rode Ash, the black stallion moving with an easy power that still amazed everyone who'd seen him try to kill men just weeks ago. They carried minimal supplies, 2 rifles, enough ammunition to fight off trouble, and a story ready about being a rancher and his wife heading to visit family in Silver Ridge. The first day passed without incident. They made good time, stopping only to water the horses and eat cold meals they'd packed. Lenora rode with the confidence of someone who'd spent her whole life in the saddle, matching Coulter's pace without complaint, even when the terrain got rough. They didn't talk much, both too focused on watching the trail, looking for signs they were being followed. That night, they made camp in a small canyon that offered cover and a clear view of anyone approaching. Coulter built a small fire while Lenora tended the horses, her movements efficient and practiced. "You learn all that from your father?" Coulter asked, watching her check Ash's hooves. "Most of it. He believed everyone on a ranch should know how to do everything. Didn't matter if you were male or female, young or old. You learned horses, cattle, equipment, basic doctoring, said specialized knowledge made you dependent on others, and dependency made you weak." "Smart man." "He was." Lenora's voice went soft. "Stubborn. Idealistic. So sure the law would protect him if he just followed the rules hard enough." She moved to her own horse. "I loved him. But watching him die believing in a broken system, that changed something in me. Made me realize sometimes you have to break rules to fix what's broken." Coulter poked at the fire, sending sparks drifting upward into the darkening sky. "My father was the opposite. Didn't trust rules or systems or anyone who claimed to represent them. He built the ranch because he wanted something that was completely his, where nobody could tell him what to do or how to live. Did it work? For him? Yeah, but it made him hard, isolated. He died alone in that house, and I sometimes wonder if all that independence was worth the loneliness." Lenora finished with the horses and came to sit across the fire from him. "Is that why you posted the advertisement, looking for someone to make the ranch feel less lonely?" "Partly. Also needed someone who could actually handle the work." Coulter smiled slightly. "Didn't expect to get someone fighting a war against land fraud." "Disappointed?" "Terrified, but not disappointed." She laughed at that, a real laugh that transformed her whole face, and Coulter felt something shift in his chest. Wade's warning echoed in his head. Attached makes a man stupid, but he pushed it aside. Some things were worth being stupid for. They reached Silver Ridge late the following afternoon. The mining camp sprawled across a narrow valley like trash scattered by wind. Ramshackle buildings, tents, mud streets, and the constant sound of picks striking rock echoing from the surrounding hills. The smell hit them first. Unwashed bodies, horse manure, wood smoke, and the metallic tang of ore. "Charming place," Coulter muttered. "The prospector lives on the north edge, named Sullivan. Just follow my lead and don't mention what we're really here for." They found Sullivan in a lean-to that barely qualified as shelter, sitting in front of a small fire stirring something in a dented pot. He was exactly what Coulter expected, ancient, sun-weathered, with a beard that looked like it housed small wildlife and eyes that had seen too much hard living. "Sullivan!" Lenora called out as they approached. The old man's head snapped up. His eyes went wide, then bright with recognition. "Little Nora? That you?" "It's me." Sullivan struggled to his feet, moving like every joint hurt. "Damn, girl, I thought you were dead. Heard stories about Voss's men hunting someone matched your description. Figured they'd caught you by now." "Not yet." Lenora dismounted and gave the old prospector a careful hug, mindful of his fragility. "This is Coulter Hayes. He's helping me." Sullivan squinted at Coulter with obvious suspicion. "That right? What's he get out of helping?" "That's complicated," Coulter said. "Everything's complicated when pretty women are involved." Sullivan waved them closer to his fire. "Sit. You're here for the box, I'm guessing." "Is it safe?" "Safe as anything can be in this hellhole. Got it buried under my bedroll. Nobody touches my sleeping spot on account of the smell." He grinned, showing maybe 3 teeth. Advantages of being old and ripe. While Lenora retrieved the box, a small metal container wrapped in oilcloth, Coulter kept watch. The mining camp had a dangerous energy, men moving with the twitchy desperation of people chasing fortunes they'd never find. The kind of place where violence could explode over a spilled drink or a suspected slight. Lenora emerged from the lean-to clutching the box, relief written across her face. "Thank you, Sullivan," she said. "I owe you. Your daddy saved my claim 20 years back when some outfit tried to jump it. Figure this makes us even." The old prospector's expression turned serious. "You be careful, little Nora. Men like Voss don't stop hunting just because you're quick. They stop when you're dead or they're in prison." "I'm working on the prison option." "Good. Put some extra bullets in them for me while you're at it." They left before the sun set, wanting distance from the camp before dark. Coulter noticed Lenora clutching the box like it might evaporate if she loosened her grip. "You want to check it?" he asked after they'd ridden an hour. "Make sure everything's still there?" "I'm afraid to look. What if something's missing? What if the documents got damaged?" Her knuckles were white around the metal edges. "This box is the only leverage I have. The only thing keeping Voss from just killing me outright. Then we'll check it together, tonight when we make camp, and whatever we find, we'll deal with it." She nodded but didn't relax her grip. They camped that night in a grove of cottonwoods near a small creek. After the horses were settled and a fire built, Lenora finally opened the box with hands that shook slightly. Inside were documents, dozens of them, ledgers, letters, deeds, maps, all carefully organized and wrapped in additional oilcloth for protection. Coulter watched as she went through each piece, checking, verifying. Her lips moved silently, counting, confirming. "Well?" he asked when she finally looked up. "It's all here. Every piece." Tears gathered in her eyes. Every single piece of evidence, proof of 17 families being defrauded, names of corrupt officials, amounts of bribes paid, everything. "Then we're in business." Lenora wiped her eyes impatiently. "We need to make copies, multiple copies, but that means finding someone with access to a printing press or legal clerk equipment, someone we can trust. Thorne will know someone. Former marshal who's been fighting corruption for 40 years? He'll have connections." Coulter reached over and closed the box gently. "For now, let's just focus on getting to Carson Springs alive." "You make that sound easier than it is." "Everything's easier when you break it into small steps. Tomorrow, we ride west. Day after, we keep riding west. Eventually, we get where we're going. And if Voss's men find us first, then we deal with that when it happens." Coulter met her eyes across the fire. "But I'm not planning on dying before I see this through. Too stubborn for that." She smiled despite herself. Stubbornness seems to be our defining characteristic. Could be worse traits to have. They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the creek and the night sounds around them. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. Closer, an owl hunted through the trees. "Can I ask you something?" Lenora said eventually. "Sure. When this is over, when we've exposed Voss and returned the land to those families, what happens to us? To this?" She gestured vaguely between them. The advertisement said wife. We've been so focused on survival, we haven't talked about what that actually means. Coulter chose his words carefully. "I meant what I said. You earned your place fair. The job's yours regardless of whether we go through with the marriage or not." "That's not what I'm asking." "I know. He poked at the fire, buying time. Truth is, I don't know. A month ago, I was just looking for someone who could help run the ranch. Someone capable, strong. Now I'm sitting here planning to take down a corrupt business empire with a woman who walked into my life and turned everything sideways. He looked up at her. So I guess the question is, what do you want? Lenora was quiet for a long time. I want to stop running. I want to wake up without checking the road for riders coming to kill me. I want to build something that matters instead of just surviving day to day. That doesn't answer the question, doesn't it? She held his gaze. Everything I just described, that's what your ranch feels like to me. The first place in 3 years where I felt like maybe I could stop running long enough to actually live. Something warm and terrifying expanded in Coulter's chest. Lenora, I'm not saying I love you, she interrupted quickly. I barely know you, and you barely know me. But I'm saying maybe there's something here worth exploring once the immediate danger of violent death passes. Coulter laughed, surprised. Well, when you put it that way, I'm practical. Sue me. Practical, right. That's definitely the word I'd use for a woman who stole evidence from murderers and bluffed 13 armed men with nothing but nerve. But he was smiling as he said it. All right, deal. We survive this mess. We figure out what comes next. Together. Together. Lenora agreed. They shook on it, formal and slightly ridiculous, and went to sleep on opposite sides of the fire, pretending they weren't both thinking about what together might actually mean. The next 2 days tested that tentative agreement. They rode hard, pushing the horses as much as they dared, always watching the trail behind them. Twice they spotted riders in the distance and had to detour, adding hours to their journey. Once they passed through a town where Lenora insisted on keeping her hat pulled low and her face hidden, certain she'd seen one of Voss's men outside the saloon. By the time they reached Carson Springs, both of them were exhausted, filthy, and running on the kind of adrenaline that made everything feel sharp-edged and slightly unreal. Carson Springs was bigger than Silver Ridge, but smaller than a real city. Maybe 500 people, actual streets, buildings that looked permanent instead of temporary. The kind of place where law meant something and people had invested in staying. They found Jacob Thorne in a small house on the east side of town, tending a garden that looked too neat and organized for someone who'd spent his life chasing outlaws. He was older than Coulter remembered. Maybe 70 now, white-haired and stooped, but still moving with the careful precision of someone who'd learned not to waste motion. When he looked up and saw Coulter, his weathered face split into a genuine smile. Coulter Hayes, I'll be damned. Thorne set down his trowel and straightened, one hand going to his lower back. Heard you took over your father's ranch. How's that working out? It's been interesting lately. Coulter dismounted and shook the old marshal's hand. Jacob, this is Lenora Vance. We need your help with something complicated. Thorne's sharp eyes moved to Lenora, assessing. Complicated how? The kind that involves land fraud, corrupt officials, and men willing to kill to keep their crimes hidden, Lenora said bluntly. The kind that could get you in trouble just for talking to us. Well? Thorne's smile widened. Now you've got my attention. Come inside. Let's hear this story. They spent the next hour laying it all out while Thorne made coffee and listened without interrupting. When they finished, he sat back in his chair and was quiet for a long moment. Edmund Voss, he said finally. Denver outfit. Been hearing rumors about his operation for a couple of years now. Nothing concrete enough to investigate, but enough smoke to suggest fire. He looked at Lenora. You're saying you've got proof? Actual documentary evidence? 17 families worth of fraud, names, dates, amounts, everything. And now you need lawyers who aren't corrupt, witnesses willing to testify, and enough legal firepower to actually make charges stick against a man with Voss's resources. That about covers it, Coulter agreed. Thorne stood and walked to the window, staring out at his garden. This is dangerous, not just for you two, for anyone who helps. Voss has a long reach and no qualms about using violence. We know, Lenora said quietly. If you can't help, we understand. We're not asking you to risk. I didn't say I wouldn't help. Thorne turned back to face them. I said it was dangerous. Those are different things. He moved to a desk in the corner and pulled out a small leather notebook. I know 3 lawyers between here and Denver who are honest and crazy enough to take this case. I also know a federal prosecutor in the territorial capital who's been looking for a way to go after Voss for months, but hasn't had the evidence. Will they listen? Coulter asked. They'll listen to me? Whether they'll take the risk of moving forward is another question. Thorne flipped through pages. The bigger problem is witnesses. You said 17 families were defrauded. How many of them are willing to testify? Lenora's expression darkened. I don't know. Most of them lost everything and were too terrified to fight back. Getting them to go public against Voss? That's going to be the hard part. Then that's where we start. We visit each family, present the evidence, give them a choice. Thorne closed his notebook. I'm too old to ride that circuit myself, but I can give you names, locations, and letters of introduction. You two will have to do the actual convincing. How long will that take? Coulter asked. Months, probably. The families are scattered across 3 territories. Some might be impossible to find. People who got defrauded tend to move on, start over somewhere new. Thorne met Coulter's eyes. This isn't going to be quick or easy, and Voss's men will be looking for you the whole time. You sure you want to commit to this? Coulter looked at Lenora. She looked back, question clear in her eyes. This is your last chance to walk away. He didn't hesitate. We're sure. All right then. Thorne grabbed paper and started writing. I'll draw up a list of families and give you introduction letters for the lawyers. You'll need to make copies of those documents first. Can't risk the originals getting lost or destroyed. There's a legal clerk here in town who owes me a favor. He can handle the copying quietly. How soon can we start? Lenore asked. Lenora chippermted. Give me 2 days to make arrangements. Meanwhile, you two should rest. You both look like you've been chewed up and spit out. Coulter couldn't argue with that. They spent those 2 days recovering. Thorne arranged boarding at a small inn on the edge of town where the owner asked no questions and kept rooms clean. Lenora slept for almost 14 hours straight the first night, exhaustion finally catching up with her. Coulter used the time to send a message back to Wade via a rider heading east, letting his foreman know they'd arrived safely and would be gone longer than expected. On the second day, while Thorne's clerk friend was making copies of the documents, Coulter found Lenora sitting outside the inn watching clouds drift across a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Nervous? He asked, settling beside her on the bench. Terrified, she admitted. What if we go through all this and the families still won't testify? What if the lawyers refuse the case? What if Voss finds us before we can build something strong enough to protect ourselves? Then we adapt. We've gotten this far by being stubborn and lucky. I figure we can keep that going a while longer. Luck runs out eventually. So does Voss's patience. At some point, he'll make a mistake. They always do. Coulter stretched his legs out. You know what I keep thinking about? What? That advertisement. Wife wanted, hard ranch, harder winters. I wrote that because I needed help and figured being honest about the difficulty would filter out anyone not serious. He glanced at her. Never occurred to me that the hardest part wouldn't be the ranch or the winters. It'd be falling into a war against corruption with a woman crazy enough to think she could win. Lenora smiled. Having regrets? Not even a little. They sat in comfortable silence until Thorne came to find them, carrying a leather satchel stuffed with documents. Copies are done, he announced. Originals are locked in a safe at the Territorial Bank here in Carson Springs. I've got connections with the manager, and he'll keep them secure. These copies are yours to use as evidence. I've also got letters for 3 lawyers, a list of the 17 families with last known locations, and a map marking the general areas where you'll need to travel. He handed everything over, and Coulter felt the weight of it, not just the physical weight of paper and leather, but the responsibility. Most of the families are reachable within a month's travel if you're efficient, Thorne continued. Start with the ones closest to here and work your way east. The lawyers are scattered, one in Boulder Creek, one in Rawlins, one all the way down in Santa Fe. I'd suggest hitting the families first, getting as many committed to testifying as possible, then approaching the lawyers with a list of actual witnesses. Makes the case stronger. Makes sense, Coulter agreed. One more thing. Thorne's expression turned serious. I sent a message to my contact in the federal prosecutor's office. Told him what you're building. He's interested, but he needs at least 5 solid witnesses willing to testify under oath before he'll consider moving forward. So that's your target. 5 families minimum. Out of 17, we should be able to get 5, Lenora said, though she didn't sound entirely convinced. Should and will are different things. But I've got faith in you two. Thorne shook both their hands. Be smart out there. Voss has eyes everywhere, and you're going to be traveling through a lot of remote territory where help won't arrive in time if things go wrong. We'll be careful, Coulter promised. They left Carson Springs the next morning at dawn, the satchel secured in Coulter's saddlebags and hope burning in both their chests like embers that might catch fire or might just fade to ash. Either way, they were committed now. The war had truly begun. The first family on Thorne's list lived in a settlement called Broken Creek, 3 days' ride northeast of Carson Springs. According to the notes, they'd been farmers named the Hendersons, a couple with 4 children who'd lost 160 acres of prime bottomland to forged documents claiming prior ownership by one of Voss's shell companies. Coulter and Lenora found the place easily enough. What passed for Broken Creek was barely a town, maybe 15 buildings clustered around a crossroads, a general store that doubled as a post office, and a church with peeling white paint. The kind of settlement that existed because someone had to serve the scattered ranches and homesteads, not because anyone particularly wanted to live there. The Henderson place sat 2 miles outside town, a modest frame house with a sagging porch and a barn that had seen better decades. Chickens scratched in the yard. A dog barked half-heartedly from somewhere behind the house. Smoke rose from the chimney, thin and uncertain in the late afternoon air. Doesn't look like they've recovered much, Lenora said quietly as they rode up. A woman appeared on the porch before they dismounted, maybe 40, worn thin by work and worry, holding a rifle with the comfortable familiarity of someone who knew how to use it. That's close enough, she called out. State your business. Coulter raised both hands, showing them empty. Mrs. Henderson, my name's Coulter Hayes. This is Lenora Vance. We're not here to cause trouble. We're here about the land you lost to Edmund Voss. The woman's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Fear, maybe, or anger that had been banked so long it had turned cold. Don't know what you're talking about, she said flatly. Yes, you do. Lenora dismounted slowly, keeping her movements visible and unthreatening. You lost 160 acres of bottomland 4 years ago. The county claimed there was a prior deed filed by Mountain West Holdings, which is a shell company owned by Voss Development. Your husband tried to fight it legally and got nowhere because the judge was being paid off. Mrs. Henderson's knuckles went white on the rifle. You need to leave. Now. We have proof, Coulter said, staying on his horse but keeping his voice gentle. Documentary evidence showing exactly how they defrauded you. And we're building a case to expose Voss and get that land back to the families he stole from. I said leave. A man emerged from the barn, tall, rangy, with the kind of permanent stoop that came from too much heavy labor. He took in the scene and moved to stand beside his wife, no weapon visible, but his hands curled into fists. Martha, what's going on? He asked. These people are asking about the land. I told them to go. Mr. Henderson's face hardened. Then they should probably listen. Lenora pulled the satchel from her saddle and opened it carefully, withdrawing a few documents. Please, just look at these. 5 minutes of your time. If you're not interested after that, we'll leave and never bother you again. Why should we trust you? Mrs. Henderson demanded. Could be you're working for Voss. Could be this is some trick to get us to say something he can use against us later. If we worked for Voss, we'd have shown up with hired guns, not legal documents, Coulter pointed out. And Lenora here is the reason we have any evidence at all. She stole it from Voss's office in Denver and has been running from his men ever since. That got their attention. Mr. Henderson studied Lenora with new interest. You're the one they've been hunting? Heard stories about a woman who walked out of Voss's headquarters with a box of secrets. Figured it was just campfire talk. It's not. Lenora held up the papers. I have proof of 17 families being defrauded, including yours. Names, dates, amounts paid in bribes, which officials were bought. Everything needed to build a legal case strong enough to take Voss down. The couple exchanged a long look, some kind of wordless communication passing between them. Finally, Mrs. Henderson lowered the rifle slightly. 5 minutes. But you stay where I can see you, and if I don't like what I hear, you leave immediately. Fair enough, Coulter agreed. They spent the next half hour on that sagging porch, while Lenora laid out the evidence piece by piece. The Hendersons listened in tense silence, their expression shifting from suspicion to recognition to something that looked like grief mixed with rage. This is it, Mr. Henderson said hoarsely, pointing to a ledger entry. This is the exact amount the judge awarded against us. Called it legal fees and court costs. We had to sell our dairy herd to pay it. The judge's name is right here in Voss's payment records, Lenora said, along with 12 other officials who took bribes to facilitate the fraud. Mrs. Henderson's hands trembled as she flipped through pages. We tried to fight, hired a lawyer, filed appeals, told everyone who'd listen that we were being robbed. Nobody cared, or the ones who did care were too scared to help. That's what Voss counts on, Lenora said. Fear, isolation, making each family think they're alone so they don't organize or fight back together. What do you want from us? Mr. Henderson asked. Testimony. We're gathering witnesses willing to testify in court about what Voss did. The more families who come forward, the stronger the case becomes. We've already got a federal prosecutor interested, but he needs at least 5 solid witnesses before he'll move forward. Testify. Mrs. Henderson laughed bitterly. Against men with enough money to buy judges and hire killers? You're asking us to paint targets on our backs. I'm asking you to get justice for what was stolen from you, Lenora said quietly. And I'm offering protection. Once we have enough witnesses, the case goes public. At that point, Voss loses the advantage of secrecy. Killing witnesses becomes too risky, too visible. The system might be corrupt, but public scrutiny still matters. Might be, Mr. Henderson echoed. That's not exactly reassuring. Nothing about this is reassuring, Coulter admitted. But I can tell you this. If nobody stands up to men like Voss, they'll keep stealing from people forever. Your land. Someone else's land. It never stops until someone forces it to stop. The couple was quiet for a long time. Then Mrs. Henderson said, We have 4 children. The oldest is 12. If we testify and something happens to us, nothing will happen to you, Lenora said with more confidence than Coulter figured she felt. We're not moving forward until we have enough witnesses and legal protection in place. This isn't a suicide mission. It's a calculated effort to use the law against people who've been abusing it. Mr. Henderson rubbed his face tiredly. Can we think about it? Talk it over as a family? Of course. We'll be in town at the boarding house for 2 days. If you decide you want to help, come find us. If not, Lenora gathered the documents carefully. If not, we understand. This is a lot to ask. They rode back to town in silence as the sun began setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if Coulter hadn't felt so hollowed out. That went well, he said sarcastically when they'd settled the horses at the livery. They didn't shoot us. I'm calling that a win. But Lenora's voice was tight with disappointment. 1 family down, 16 to go. At this rate, we'll be traveling for a year before we get 5 witnesses. It's the first one. They're always the hardest. You don't know that. No, Coulter admitted, but I'm trying to stay optimistic. They got separate rooms at the boarding house. Coulter insisted on that, propriety being important even in the middle of a war against corruption. He lay awake that night listening to footsteps in the hallway and wondering if the Hendersons would come through or if this whole mission was doomed before it really started. The answer came the next morning. Coulter was drinking terrible coffee in the boarding house dining room when Mr. Henderson walked in, hat in hand, looking like he hadn't slept at all. We'll do it, he said without preamble. Martha and I talked all night. We'll testify. Relief hit Coulter so hard he had to set down his coffee cup before he dropped it. You're sure? No, we're terrified. But our oldest boy asked us last night why we let the bad men take our land without fighting harder, and I didn't have a good answer. Henderson's jaw tightened. So we'll testify. We'll tell everyone exactly what Voss did to us. And if that gets our land back, if it helps even one other family avoid what we went through, then it's worth the risk. Lenora appeared in the doorway, still pulling on her coat. You mean it? We mean it. Just, please, make sure this actually goes somewhere. We're putting everything on the line here. Our safety. Our children's safety. Don't let it be for nothing. It won't be, Lenora promised. I swear to you, this matters. They spent the next hour getting a formal statement from Henderson, documenting everything he remembered about the fraud. Dates, conversations, the forged documents, the judge's suspicious ruling. Lenora took notes in careful handwriting while Coulter asked questions. building a narrative that would hold up under legal scrutiny. By the time they finished, they had their first witness. One down, 4 more minimum to go. The next 2 weeks became a blur of travel, dusty roads, and difficult conversations. They visited the second family on the list, the Mortons, who'd lost ranch land in Wyoming, and found the house abandoned, neighbors saying they'd moved to California after losing everything. The third family, the Calloways, lived in a settlement so remote it took 5 days of hard riding to reach them. When Coulter and Lenora finally arrived, they discovered the father had died 2 years ago, and the widow wanted nothing to do with testifying against anyone, too broken by loss to risk more pain. But the fourth family, the Bishops, who'd lost a homestead in Colorado, said yes immediately. "We've been waiting for someone to fight back," Mrs. Bishop said fiercely. She was a small woman with iron gray hair and eyes that burned with banked fury. "Waiting for 3 years. If you're finally doing something about Voss, then hell yes, we'll help." 2 witnesses, 3 more needed. The fifth family, the Rodriguezes, took more convincing. They'd lost land near the New Mexico border and had rebuilt slowly, terrified of drawing attention. But when Lenora showed them proof that the same officials who'd defrauded them had done it to 16 other families, something shifted. Mr. Rodriguez stared at the documents for a long time, then looked at his wife and said something in rapid Spanish. She responded, her voice sharp and angry. They argued briefly, then both turned to face Coulter and Lenora. "We will testify," Mr. Rodriguez said in heavily accented English. "But only if you promise these men will be punished. Not just, slap on the wrist. Real punishment." "Prison time if we can prove the fraud," Lenora said. "Return of stolen land to the rightful owners. Exposure of every corrupt official involved." "Then yes, we will help." 3 witnesses. Halfway to the federal prosecutor's minimum. But the sixth family nearly broke them. The Pratts lived in a valley so isolated it didn't even have a name on Thorne's map. It took Coulter and Lenora a week to find them, following vague directions from people who'd heard of them third hand. When they finally located the place, it was clear immediately that something was wrong. The house was burned. Not recently. The ruins had weathered several seasons, but thoroughly. Nothing remained except blackened timber and a stone chimney standing like a gravestone. "No," Lenora whispered, staring at the destruction. They found graves behind where the house had been. 3 of them. Small wooden crosses with names carved by inexpert hands. Thomas Pratt. Sarah Pratt. Daniel Pratt, age 7. A neighbor who lived 5 miles away told them the rest when they tracked him down. "Raiders came through about a year ago," the man said, uncomfortable and awkward. "Burned the Pratts out. Shot Thomas when he tried to stop them. Sarah and the boy died in the fire." "Why?" Coulter asked, though he already knew. Thomas had been talking about suing to get his land back, told folks he had evidence of fraud. Guess Voss's people heard about it and decided to send a message. Lenora walked away before the man finished talking. Coulter found her later sitting beside the graves, her face dry but her eyes holding something worse than tears, a kind of hollow devastation that scared him. "This is my fault," she said. "No, this is Voss's fault. If I hadn't stolen those documents, if I hadn't started this, maybe they'd still be alive. Maybe they would have just accepted the loss and moved on and spent the rest of their lives knowing they'd been robbed and couldn't do anything about it." Coulter sat down beside her. "Thomas Pratt was trying to fight back before you ever stole anything. That's why Voss killed him, because he was brave enough to stand up. He died for it." "Yeah, he did. And that's on Voss, not you." Coulter took her hand, holding it tight. "We can stop. Right now. 3 witnesses might not be enough for the prosecutor, but it's something. We can go back, turn over what we have, hope it makes a difference." Lenora looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. "You want to quit? I want you to stop carrying guilt for murders you didn't commit. I want you to stop thinking every bad thing that's happened is somehow your responsibility." He squeezed her hand. "But no, I don't want to quit. I want to burn Voss's entire operation to the ground and make sure he pays for every family he's destroyed." Something shifted in Lenora's expression. The devastation hardened into something colder, sharper. "Then let's keep going," she said. "Let's find every witness we can, build the strongest case possible, and make damn sure Thomas Pratt didn't die for nothing." They stayed that night in the neighbor's barn, too exhausted and heartsick to ride further. Coulter woke sometime around midnight to find Lenora's bedroll empty. He found her outside, staring at stars so bright they looked like holes punched in the sky. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Keeps thinking about that little boy. Daniel. He was 7. Same age my youngest brother was when—" She stopped, shook her head. "I had 3 brothers. Lost them all to scarlet fever when I was 15. Watching my mother bury them one after another, that broke something in her she never got back." Coulter hadn't known that. "I'm sorry." "Everyone's sorry. That's what people say when terrible things happen. But sorry doesn't fix anything." Lenora wrapped her arms around herself. "I keep wondering if this is worth it. If revenge against Voss is worth more people dying. This isn't revenge. It's justice. Is there a difference?" "Yeah. Revenge is about making yourself feel better. Justice is about making things right for everyone." Coulter moved closer, close enough to feel her warmth in the cold night air. "Those families who agreed to testify, they're not doing it for revenge. They're doing it because they want their land back. They want corrupt officials held accountable. They want the system to work the way it's supposed to. The system that got Thomas Pratt and his family killed. The system that Voss broke and we're trying to fix," Coulter corrected. "You can't blame the law for being corrupt when men like Voss are the ones who corrupted it." Lenora was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I don't know if I'm brave enough for this." "You're the bravest person I've ever met. I'm terrified constantly. Every town we ride into, I'm checking for Voss's men. Every conversation, I'm waiting for someone to recognize me and sell me out. Every night, I wonder if tomorrow's the day our luck runs out and we both end up like the Pratts. That's not cowardice. That's being smart enough to understand the stakes." Coulter reached out slowly and turned her to face him. "Brave isn't not being scared. Brave is being scared and doing it anyway. And you've been doing it anyway since the day you walked into Voss's office and started copying documents." Her eyes searched his face. "Why are you doing this? Really? You could have kicked me out the moment I told you the truth. Could have avoided all of this danger and gone back to your peaceful ranch life. Peaceful is overrated, and I told you, once I decide something's mine, I don't let it go." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture more intimate than he'd intended. "You're part of my ranch now, part of my life. That makes your fight mine too." "Coulter." He kissed her, soft and careful, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She didn't pull away. Instead, she grabbed the front of his shirt and kissed him back with enough intensity to make his head spin. It lasted maybe 10 seconds before she broke away, breathing hard. "That was—" she started. "Yeah. We probably shouldn't—" "Probably not." They stared at each other. Then Lenora laughed, surprised and breathless. "We're in the middle of running from killers, building a legal case, and visiting families who've been destroyed by fraud. This is the worst possible timing." "Absolutely terrible timing," Coulter agreed. "We should wait. Focus on the mission. Deal with complicated feelings after we're not in constant danger." "That's the smart move." Lenora kissed him again anyway. They didn't talk about it the next morning, just packed up and rode out like nothing had changed, even though everything had changed. The air between them felt different now, charged with possibility and fear in equal measure. The 7th family on the list lived near a town called Redemption, which Coulter figured was either ironic or prophetic depending on how things went. They arrived to find the father, Samuel Cross, working in a blacksmith shop he'd built after losing his farm. He listened to their pitch while hammering horseshoes, the rhythmic clang of metal on metal providing percussion to Lenora's explanation of the evidence and the case they were building. When she finished, Cross set down his hammer and wiped sweat from his forehead. "You're asking me to testify against Edmund Voss," he said. "Yes." "You know what happens to people who cross Voss?" "We do. We just visited the Pratt family. What's left of them?" Cross's expression darkened. "Heard about that. Whole valley heard about it. That's why nobody's fought back since. Voss made his point clear. Resist and die." "Which is exactly why we need people brave enough to stand up anyway," Coulter said. "If everyone stays scared, Voss wins forever. And if we stand up and get killed, Voss still wins, just with more bodies in his wake." Cross picked up his hammer again, testing its weight. "I've got a wife and 2 daughters. I can't risk them just to maybe get back land I've already accepted losing." Your daughters will grow up knowing their father surrendered to criminals, Lenora said quietly. Is that the lesson you want to teach them? That powerful men can steal whatever they want and nobody will stop them? Cross's jaw tightened. That's a low blow, Miss Vance. It's the truth, and you know it. Lenora didn't back down. I'm not asking you to do this for me. I'm asking you to do it for them, so they grow up in a world where justice actually means something. For a long moment, the only sound was the fire crackling in the forge. Then Cross said, I need to talk to my wife. They got their answer that evening. Cross found them at the inn, his wife beside him, a sturdy woman with flour in her hair and determination in her eyes. We'll testify, Mrs. Cross said. Both of us. We were there when the fraud happened. We can both provide testimony about what we saw and heard. 4 witnesses. One more, and they'd hit the prosecutor's minimum. The 8th family, the Lowells, lived in the mountains near a played-out silver mine. They found the place after 2 days of steep climbing that left the horses winded and both riders aching from the altitude. Mr. Lowell met them with a shotgun and suspicion that took an hour of talking to break through. But when he finally looked at the evidence, when he saw his name in Voss's ledgers alongside the amount of money that had been paid to steal his claim, something inside him cracked. I thought I was alone, he said, his voice breaking. Thought I was the only one stupid enough to get robbed like this. You weren't stupid. You were targeted, Lenora said, and you're not alone. 16 other families went through exactly what you did. Will testifying actually change anything? We don't know, Coulter admitted. But we know doing nothing definitely won't change anything. Lowell looked at his wife. She nodded once, sharp and certain. All right, Lowell said. We'll do it. We'll testify. 5 witnesses. They'd hit the minimum. That night, camped in the mountains with wind howling through the pines, Coulter and Lenora sat by their fire and allowed themselves a moment of cautious celebration. 5 families, Lenora said, staring at the flames. Enough for the prosecutor to move forward. Assuming he keeps his word. He will. Thorne trusts him, and I trust Thorne. She pulled her coat tighter against the cold. We should keep going. Visit the remaining families. The more witnesses we have, the stronger the case. Agreed. But we should also start coordinating with the lawyers. Get them up to speed on what we've gathered so far. Coulter poked the fire with a stick, sending sparks drifting upward. This is actually happening. We're actually going to take this to trial. Don't celebrate yet. Getting to trial is one thing, winning is another. But despite the warning, Lenora was smiling. Still, 5 witnesses. That's more than I thought we'd get after the Hendersons almost turned us away. You convinced them. You convinced all of them. We convinced them. This isn't just my fight anymore, Coulter. It stopped being that the moment you decided to help. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the fire and the wind and the vast quiet of the mountains. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. Closer, the horses shuffled and settled for the night. Can I ask you something? Coulter said eventually. Always. What happens after? When this is all over and Voss is in prison and the land is returned and there's nothing left to fight for? What then? Lenora considered this question seriously. Honestly, I don't know. I've been so focused on survival and justice, I haven't thought about normal life in years. Would you want to go back to ranching, your family's old place, if you could get it back? Maybe. Or maybe I'd want something completely different, something that isn't tied to all this pain and loss. She looked at him. Why are you asking? Because that offer still stands. The job, the ranch, He hesitated. Whatever we're calling this thing between us. The terribly timed romance in the middle of a war? That's the one, Lenora laughed softly. I don't know what I want yet, Coulter. Ask me again when we're not dodging hired killers and building legal cases against corrupt businessmen. Fair enough? But when they settled into their bedrolls later, they positioned them closer than strictly necessary. And when Coulter woke during the night to add wood to the dying fire, he found Lenora watching him with an expression that suggested she might already know what she wanted, even if she wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. They continued the circuit. The 9th family, the Parkers, said yes after minimal convincing, eager for any chance at justice. The 10th family had moved to Oregon and couldn't be found. The 11th family, the Sullivans, said no, too frightened to risk Voss's retaliation. The 12th family said yes. The 13th couldn't be located. By the time they'd exhausted Thorne's list, they had 8 families willing to testify. 8 witnesses with documented evidence of fraud, bribery, and corruption spanning 3 territories. It was more than enough. They met with the first lawyer in Boulder Creek, a sharp-eyed woman named Caroline Webb, who read through the evidence with growing excitement. "This is extraordinary," she said, flipping through pages. "I've been trying to build a case against Voss for 2 years. This could actually do it." "Will you take it?" Lenora asked. "Absolutely, but I'll need time to prepare. Depositions from each witness, coordination with the other lawyers, communication with the federal prosecutor." Webb looked up, her expression serious. "This is going to be a long fight. Months, maybe a year before we get to trial. Voss will do everything possible to delay, dismiss, or destroy the case. Are your witnesses prepared for that?" "They've already lost everything once. I think they're prepared to fight for as long as it takes," Coulter said. The second lawyer in Rawlins had a similar reaction. So did the third, down in Santa Fe, a grizzled attorney named Marcus Stone who'd been fighting land fraud cases for 30 years. "About damn time someone hit Voss this hard," Stone said, grinning. "I'll coordinate with Webb and the others. We'll build this case so tight even bought judges won't be able to dismiss it." By early autumn, the pieces were in place. 8 witnesses, 3 lawyers, documentary evidence that proved systematic fraud, and a federal prosecutor who'd formally agreed to pursue criminal charges if the civil case generated enough public pressure. All they needed now was to survive long enough to see it through. The attack came on their way back to Hayes Ranch. They'd been traveling for 3 days, taking a route through rough country to avoid main roads where Voss's men might be watching. It was late afternoon, the sun already dropping toward the horizon, when Coulter caught the glint of metal in the rocks ahead. "Down!" he shouted. The first shot missed Lenora by inches. They dove from their horses, scrambling for cover behind a scatter of boulders as gunfire erupted from at least 3 positions in the rocks above them. The horses bolted, taking their supplies and rifles with them. "How many?" Lenora gasped, pressed against Stone with her revolver drawn. "Can't tell. 3 shooters minimum." Coulter risked a glance around the boulder and immediately jerked back as a bullet chipped Stone inches from his face. "Maybe more." "We're pinned down." "Yeah, I noticed." More shots, close enough that Coulter could feel the impacts vibrating through the rock behind him. This wasn't warning fire or intimidation. This was a professional kill squad trying to finish them efficiently. "They'll flank us," Lenora said, her voice tight with controlled fear. "Get above us or circle around. We can't hold this position." She was right. The boulder provided cover from the front but left them exposed to anyone who climbed higher or moved to either side. And with the horses gone, they had no supplies, limited ammunition, and no way to run. Coulter's mind raced, calculating angles and options and finding nothing good. Then he heard something that changed everything. Hoofbeats. Multiple horses, coming fast from the direction they'd been traveling. For one terrible moment, Coulter thought it was more of Voss's men, that they were surrounded completely and about to die in this nameless stretch of rock and scrub. Then he heard Wade's voice bellowing across the canyon. "Boss, get down and stay down!" Gunfire exploded from a new direction, behind the ambushers. Coulter heard shouting, curses, the sound of men scrambling for new cover. The shots coming at their position stopped abruptly as Voss's men found themselves caught between 2 forces. "Wade brought the ranch hands," Lenora breathed, amazed. Coulter didn't waste time questioning the miracle. He grabbed Lenora's arm. "Come on," while they're distracted. They ran, staying low, using the confusion to break from their position and sprint toward where the new gunfire originated. Coulter saw Wade and Dutch firing from behind rocks, saw Amos and Charlie circling to cut off the ambushers' escape route. The fight lasted maybe 5 more minutes. Brutal, close quarters, the kind of violence that happened too fast for thinking. When it ended, 2 of Voss's men were dead. One was wounded and captured, and the rest had fled into the rocks. Wade rode up, his weathered face split in a fierce grin. "Told you the ranch needs you alive, boss. Figured we'd better make sure you stayed that way." "How did you know where to find us?" Coulter demanded. "Got word from one of Thorne's contacts that Voss's men were setting up an ambush on this route. We've been trailing you for 2 days, staying far enough back not to be spotted, but close enough to help if trouble hit." Wade dismounted and clasped Coulter's shoulder. "Good thing, too. They had you dead to rights." Lenora was staring at the ranch hands with something like wonder. You came all this way to protect us. You're part of the crew now, Dutch said simply. We look out for our own. They made camp that night with double watches and loaded rifles, too cautious to celebrate their survival. The captured gunman, a hard-eyed killer named Briggs, refused to talk at first, but Lenora convinced him by showing him copies of the evidence. You're working for a man who's going to prison, she said flatly. The only question is whether you go down with him or save yourself by cooperating. Briggs stared at the documents, then at Lenora, then back at the documents. Voss has 6 more teams looking for you, he said finally. He's obsessed. Told us to bring you back dead or alive. But he'd prefer alive so he can find out where the original documents are hidden. Good luck with that, Coulter muttered. I'm serious. He's mobilized every resource he has. You've really gotten under his skin. Briggs almost sounded impressed. What'd you do to piss him off so bad? Stole evidence of 17 counts of land fraud, multiple counts of bribery, and at least 1 murder, Lenora said. Plus, I made him look weak by escaping his organization and building a case that's going to destroy him. Well, that'd do it. Briggs slumped against the rock they'd tied him to. For what it's worth, I'm just hired help. Never knew the details of what he was doing, just got paid to track and eliminate problems. You're still an accomplice to attempted murder, Wade pointed out. Yeah, I'm aware. Briggs closed his eyes. Do what you want with me. I'm done working for Voss either way. They turned him over to the territorial marshal in the next town, along with a full statement about the ambush and Voss's ongoing campaign of violence. It wouldn't be enough to arrest Voss, not yet, but it was another piece of evidence, another crack in his armor. By the time they finally made it back to Hayes Ranch, it was late October and the first snow had already dusted the high peaks white. The ranch looked exactly as Coulter had left it, solid, weathered, home. But riding up to it now with Lenora beside him and 8 witnesses ready to testify against corruption, everything felt different somehow. Bigger. More important. Wade had ridden ahead and the crew was waiting. They'd prepared a meal, decent beef, potatoes, gravy that wasn't quite as lumpy as usual. It wasn't fancy, but it was theirs. That night, after the food was gone and the men had drifted back to the bunkhouse, Coulter found Lenora in the barn with Ash. The stallion had been well cared for in their absence, gleaming and healthy and greeting Lenora with obvious joy. We did it, Coulter said quietly. 8 witnesses, 3 lawyers, evidence secured. The case is actually happening. Now we just have to survive until trial, Lenora said, stroking Ash's neck, which could be months away. We'll survive. We've got good people watching our backs now. Coulter moved to stand beside her. Question is, what do you want to do while we wait? Stay here, keep moving. Lenora looked around the barn, at the horse she'd gentled, the ranch she'd helped defend, the man who'd stood beside her through everything. I want to stay, she said finally. I want to stop running. Build something here instead of just surviving somewhere else. You sure? No, but I'm sure I want to try. She turned to face him fully. That offer you keep making, the job, the ranch, the terribly timed romance, I think I'd like to take you up on it, all of it, if it's still available. Coulter pulled her close and kissed her like he'd been wanting to for months. It's available, he said when they finally broke apart. It'll always be available. Outside, snow began to fall soft and quiet, covering the ranch in white that looked like a fresh start. Winter settled over the ranch like a held breath, cold and waiting. The case against Edmund Voss officially filed in territorial court 3 weeks after Coulter and Lenora returned. Caroline Webb sent word via messenger, a brief letter outlining the charges, the evidence submitted, and the fact that Voss's lawyers had already filed 6 motions to dismiss before the ink was even dry on the complaint. They're scared, Lenora said, reading the letter for the 3rd time at the kitchen table. Voss wouldn't be fighting this hard if he thought he could win easily. Or he's just throwing money at lawyers to delay until he can find another way to solve the problem, Coulter countered, pouring coffee that had been sitting too long and tasted like burnt dirt. Like sending more hired guns to finish what the last group started. Cheerful thought. Realistic thought. He sat down across from her. We need to assume Voss will keep coming until either we're dead or he's in prison. No middle ground. Lenora folded the letter carefully. Webb says the preliminary hearing is set for January. That's 2 months away. 2 months where Voss knows exactly where we'll be and when. Then we make sure this ranch is ready for whatever he sends. Coulter drummed his fingers on the table. Wade's already got the men running security rotations. We've got enough ammunition stockpiled to hold off a small army, and Thorne sent word he's contacted the territorial marshal about providing protection once the trial actually starts. Protection, Lenore laughed without humor. From a system that Voss has been bribing for years, that's reassuring. It's better than nothing. Barely. They sat in tense silence, both knowing the real problem wasn't security measures or legal strategies. The real problem was waiting. Living every day knowing violence could arrive at any moment but having no control over when or how. It was wearing on both of them. Coulter had started sleeping lighter, waking at every unusual sound. Lenora checked the roads compulsively, her hand drifting to her revolver whenever riders approached, even if they were just neighboring ranchers or supply deliveries. The ranch hands felt it too. The whole place hummed with nervous energy like a guitar string wound too tight. 3 days before Christmas, that string finally snapped. Coulter was in the barn checking on a mare that had come up lame when he heard shouting from the main house. He grabbed his rifle and ran, his heart already hammering. Wade met him halfway across the yard, face grim. Ryder came in fast, says he's got a message from Voss, says it's urgent and he'll only deliver it directly to Miss Vance. Where is he now? Front porch. Amos has a rifle on him, but he's not making any threatening moves, just sitting there looking smug. Coulter found the messenger exactly as Wade described, a well-dressed man in his 30s with soft hands and expensive boots, sitting calmly on the porch steps like he'd been invited for tea. Amos stood 10 feet away, Winchester leveled and ready. Lenora emerged from the house, her face pale but composed. "I'm Lenora Vance," she said. "What's the message?" The messenger reached slowly into his coat, making sure everyone could see the movement, and withdrew an envelope. "Mr. Voss asked me to deliver this personally. He was very specific about that." "Put it on the step and back away," Coulter ordered. The messenger complied, setting the envelope down carefully before retreating to where his horse waited. "Mr. Voss also asked me to wait for a response, if there is one." "You can wait in hell for all I care," Lenora said, snatching up the envelope. "Tell Voss if he has something to say, he can say it in court. I'll convey the message." The messenger tipped his hat with exaggerated politeness, mounted his horse, and rode away at a leisurely pace that suggested he wasn't worried about being shot. Lenora didn't open the envelope until they were back inside with the door locked and Coulter standing beside her. The letter was brief, written in elegant handwriting on expensive paper. "Miss Vance, I find myself impressed by your persistence. Not many people have caused me this much inconvenience and lived long enough to see it through. However, I believe we've reached a point where continued hostilities serve neither of us. I'm prepared to offer you a settlement. $100,000 paid immediately, in exchange for the return of all documents and your agreement to withdraw from the legal proceedings. The families currently involved will also receive compensation, $20,000 each, contingent on their silence. This is a generous offer. I suggest you consider it carefully. The alternative is to proceed with a trial that will cost you years of your life, destroy what little safety you've managed to establish, and ultimately accomplish nothing. My lawyers are very good, Miss Vance. The system you're trying to use against me is the same system I've been successfully manipulating for a decade. You cannot win, but you can walk away wealthy and alive. I await your response. Edmund Voss. Lenora read it twice, then crumpled the paper in her fist. "He's trying to buy us off," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "After everything, after the Pratts, after Thomas and his family died trying to fight him, he thinks he can just throw money at the problem and make it disappear." "It's a lot of money," Coulter said carefully. She stared at him. "You can't be serious. I'm not saying we should take it. I'm saying we should think about what it means that he's offering." Coulter took the crumpled letter from her hand and smoothed it out. "Voss doesn't make offers like this unless he's worried. $100,000 plus payments to 8 families? That's $250,000 minimum. Men like him don't spend that kind of money on problems they think they can solve cheaper through violence." "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying we're winning. The case is strong enough that Voss is trying to settle before it goes to trial. That means he knows the evidence could actually destroy him. Lenora's anger shifted slightly, calculation replacing rage. You really think so? I think a man who was confident in his lawyers wouldn't be offering life-changing money to people he could just kill. Coulter set the letter on the table. But we need to be smart about this. If we reject his offer outright, he'll escalate. More violence, more desperate measures. We should at least pretend to consider it while we prepare for whatever comes next. Pretend how? Send a response saying we're discussing it with the other families. Buy ourselves time to coordinate with Webb and the other lawyers, get the witnesses somewhere safe, maybe even leak this settlement offer to the press. A slow smile crossed Coulter's face. Nothing damages a man's reputation like public proof he tried to bribe his way out of fraud charges. For the first time since reading the letter, Lenora smiled back. You're devious when you want to be. I'm a rancher. We learn to think strategically about predators. They spent the next 2 days crafting a response that walked a careful line between seeming interested and not actually committing to anything. Meanwhile, Coulter sent urgent messages to all 8 witness families, warning them about potential bribery attempts and arranging for them to be moved to secure locations until the trial. Webb's response arrived via telegram. Settlement offer is gift. Leak to press immediately. Will destroy his credibility. So they did exactly that. Coulter rode to the nearest town with a newspaper and sold the story to a young reporter hungry for a scoop. Within a week, the headline, Voss Development offers $250,000 to silence fraud victims, was running in papers across 3 territories. The public reaction was immediate and brutal. Suddenly, people who'd dismissed the fraud allegations as sour grapes from failed settlers were asking hard questions. Why would an innocent man offer that kind of money to make a case disappear? What was Voss trying to hide? Other victims started coming forward, families who hadn't been on Thorne's original list, but who'd suffered similar fraud and now saw an opportunity for justice. Voss's political allies began distancing themselves. Officials who'd taken his bribes suddenly developed convenient memory problems. The territorial governor, facing re-election, announced a special investigation into land fraud allegations. The tide was turning, but that just made Voss more dangerous. The second attack came in January, 2 weeks before the preliminary hearing. This time, Voss's men didn't bother with ambushes or pretense. They just came straight at the ranch, 20 armed riders arriving at dawn with torches and enough firepower to level the place. The only reason Hayes Ranch survived was because Wade had anticipated exactly this kind of assault. He'd positioned men in the barn loft, behind reinforced positions in the bunkhouse, and on the roof of the main house. When Voss's force charged in expecting minimal resistance, they ran straight into a kill box. The fight was vicious and brief. Coulter fought from the house, Lenora beside him, both of them firing with the grim efficiency of people who knew this was life or death. Dutch took a bullet in the shoulder but kept fighting. Charlie got burned when one of the torches landed too close, but Amos dragged him to safety and put out the flames. By the time the sun was fully up, 12 of Voss's men were dead or wounded. The rest had fled. Hayes Ranch was still standing, though the barn had taken damage and the bunkhouse roof was partially burned. Nobody celebrated the victory. "This won't stop," Wade said, his face blackened with powder smoke as they counted the bodies. "Voss will just send more men, bigger force. Eventually, he'll overwhelm us through sheer numbers." "Then we need to end this before he gets the chance," Coulter said. "Move up the trial timeline somehow. Force his hand." Lenora was sitting on the porch steps, staring at the carnage in the yard with an expression that scared Coulter more than the actual fighting had. "People died defending me," she said when he sat beside her. 12 men just died trying to kill me, and we killed them instead, and this is all because I stole some documents 3 years ago." "This is because Edmund Voss built an empire on fraud and murder," Coulter corrected firmly. "Don't you dare take responsibility for his crimes." "But if you just what? Let him get away with it. Let 17 families stay robbed? Let corrupt officials keep profiting from other people's suffering?" He grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. "You did the right thing, Lenora. The hard thing, the brave thing. And yes, people have died because of it. But they died fighting against something evil, not supporting it. That matters." She searched his face, her eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. "Does it? Does any of this matter if we don't win?" "We're going to win." "You don't know that." "No, but I believe it anyway." He pulled her close, holding her while she finally let herself shake apart.
And you're going to believe it too, because the alternative is giving up, and I know you're too stubborn for that. She laughed wetly against his shoulder. Stubborn? That's your answer for everything. It's gotten us this far.
They buried the dead, Voss's men, in unmarked graves on the edge of the property because nobody else would claim them. The territorial marshal arrived 3 days later to investigate, took statements, and officially ruled it self-defense. But his presence also made something clear. The violence was escalating beyond what local law enforcement could handle. You need federal protection, the marshal said bluntly. This has gone past land fraud into open warfare. I'm sending a telegram to the territorial capital recommending they assign marshals to guard you until trial. Will they actually do it? Lenora asked. If they're smart, yes. This case is getting too much public attention to ignore. And if you die before testifying, it'll look like the government couldn't protect its own witnesses. Politicians hate that kind of embarrassment. The federal marshals arrived a week later, 3 hard-faced men who moved through the ranch like they were securing a military position. They set up a perimeter, established clear protocols for who could approach, and made it obvious that anyone trying to reach Coulter or Lenora would have to go through them first. It should have made everyone feel safer. Instead, it just underscored how serious the danger had become. The preliminary hearing happened on a bitter cold January morning in a courthouse that had been built to impress, all columns and marble, and the kind of formal authority meant to make ordinary people feel small. Coulter and Lenora entered surrounded by marshals, Caroline Webb walking beside them with a leather case full of documents. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, curious townspeople, representatives from the families involved, and more lawyers than Coulter had ever seen in one place. And Edmund Voss himself, sitting at the defense table like he owned the room. This was Coulter's first time seeing the man in person. Voss was maybe 50, well-dressed in a way that screamed money, with silver hair and the kind of face that probably looked trustworthy in business meetings. But his eyes were cold and calculating as they tracked Lenora across the courtroom. "Don't look at him," Coulter murmured. "Can't help it. I've been running from him for 3 years. Hard to ignore him now that we're in the same room." They took their seats. The judge entered, an older man named Blackwood, with a reputation for being stern but fair. The kind of judge who couldn't be bought, according to Thorne, which was why Webb had worked so hard to get the case assigned to his courtroom. The hearing itself was mostly procedural. Voss's lawyers, a team of 5 led by a shark-faced man named Dennison, argued for dismissal on various technical grounds. Webb countered each motion methodically, presenting evidence, witness lists, and legal precedent. It was boring and tense in equal measure, watching justice reduced to arguments about procedure and jurisdiction. But it mattered. Every motion Voss's team made that got denied was another step closer to actual trial. Finally, after 3 hours of legal wrangling, Judge Blackwood looked over his spectacles at both sides. "Counselors, I've heard enough. The defense's motions to dismiss are denied. This case will proceed to trial." He consulted a calendar. "We'll reconvene April 15th for jury selection. In the meantime, I'm issuing a protective order for all witnesses. Any attempts at intimidation, bribery, or violence will result in immediate criminal charges and contempt findings." The gavel came down with a crack that echoed through the courtroom. They'd done it. The case was going to trial. Coulter felt Lenora's hand find his under the table, squeezing tight enough to hurt. As they filed out of the courtroom, Voss intercepted them in the hallway. His lawyers tried to stop him, but he brushed them aside with obvious irritation. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice pleasant and conversational, "I wanted to meet the woman who's caused me so much trouble." The marshals immediately positioned themselves between Voss and Lenora, hands on their weapons. "Back away, sir," one of them ordered. "I'm simply talking to the young lady," Voss said mildly. "No law against conversation, is there?" "There's a protective order that says you don't get within 20 feet of the witnesses," Webb snapped. "Move, now!" Voss smiled, cold and amused. "Very well. But Miss Vance, before I go, I want you to understand something. You think you've won because a judge denied a few motions. You think public attention will protect you. You think the system is finally working in your favor." He leaned slightly to the side so he could see past the marshals, making direct eye contact with Lenora. "You're wrong. This trial will destroy you even if you win. I have resources you can't imagine and patience you can't match. I will drag this out for years. I will make sure every detail of your life becomes public record. I will bankrupt the families who trusted you. And in the end, even if by some miracle the verdict goes against me, I'll appeal until you're too exhausted to continue fighting." "Is that a threat?" Coulter demanded. "It's a promise." Voss straightened his coat. "The offer still stands, by the way. $250,000. Walk away now, and all of this ends." Lenora pulled free from Coulter's protective grip and stepped forward until she was right at the edge of where the marshals would allow. "Here's my promise," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the courthouse hallway. "I'm going to sit in that courtroom and testify about every crime you committed. I'm going to watch 8 families tell their stories about how you destroyed their lives. I'm going to present every piece of evidence proving you're a fraud and a criminal. And then I'm going to watch you go to prison." She smiled, sharp and fierce. "The only question is whether you do your time in territorial prison or federal prison. But either way, Edmund Voss, you're done stealing from people." For just a moment, Voss's pleasant mask slipped. Coulter saw raw fury underneath, the kind of anger that came from a man not used to being defied. Then Voss smiled again, shook his head like she'd said something amusing, and walked away surrounded by his lawyers. Webb exhaled shakily. "Well, that was dramatic." "Was it smart?" Coulter asked. "Antagonizing him like that?" "Probably not," Lenore admitted, "but it felt amazing." They made it back to the ranch without incident, though the 3-day journey felt longer with everyone on high alert. The marshals maintained their protection detail, riding ahead to scout and staying alert for ambushes that never materialized. The absence of violence was somehow more unsettling than attacks would have been. "He's planning something," Wade said on their second night back. "Voss doesn't just back off because a judge said mean things to him. He's regrouping. Or he's realized that killing us now would be too obvious," Lenore suggested. "With federal marshals providing protection and the case getting national attention, we're too visible to murder quietly." "So what's his play?" Coulter asked. Nobody had a good answer. The answer came 3 weeks later in the form of a newspaper article. Coulter was drinking morning coffee when Dutch burst into the kitchen waving the territorial paper, his face flushed with anger. "Boss, you need to see this. They're running a piece about the case." The headline read, "Questions Raised About Fraud Case Credibility." The article was a masterpiece of subtle character assassination. It didn't directly call Lenora a liar. That would be too obvious. Instead, it raised concerns about her background. Mentioned she'd been employed by Voss Development under a false name, suggested her evidence might have been tampered with or selectively edited, quoted anonymous sources, claiming she'd been romantically involved with multiple men in Denver and might be pursuing this case for personal revenge rather than justice. It was all innuendo and implication, carefully worded to avoid libel charges while still destroying her credibility. "This is garbage," Lenora said, reading over Coulter's shoulder. "None of this is true. I wasn't romantically involved with anyone in Denver. I used my real name when I worked there. The evidence hasn't been tampered with." "Doesn't matter if it is true," Coulter said grimly. "Matters if people believe it. And Voss just planted enough doubt to make potential jurors question everything about you." Webb confirmed as much when they met with her 2 days later. "He's poisoning the well," she said, spreading out similar articles from 3 other newspapers. "All running the same stories with slight variations, all timed perfectly to come out after the preliminary hearing, but before jury selection." Can we sue for libel?" Lenore demanded. "Technically, yes. Practically, no. By the time a libel case worked through the courts, the fraud trial would be long over, and suing would just give Voss's people more opportunities to spread these stories while pretending to defend themselves." Webb pinched the bridge of her nose. "This is brilliant, actually. Evil, but brilliant. He can't attack the evidence directly because it's too strong, so he's attacking you personally, making jurors wonder if they can trust the source." "So what do we do?" Coulter asked. "We fight back with the truth. Get character witnesses who can testify about Lenora's integrity. Find people from Denver who knew her and can refute these claims. Build a narrative that's stronger than Voss's lies." Webb looked at Lenora seriously. "But I need to know, is there anything in your past he could dig up? Anything that would give credence to these stories?" "No, I've never—" Lenora's voice cracked slightly. "I worked in his office. I went home at night. I didn't have relationships or scandals or any of the things he's implying. The most exciting thing I did was steal documents from his file room. Then we have a case. But you need to be prepared for worse attacks than this. Voss will dig into every aspect of your life looking for ammunition, your family, your history. Every mistake you've ever made will get magnified and twisted. Lenora sat back in her chair, looking more exhausted than Coulter had ever seen her. I just want this to be over. It will be. 3 more months until trial. We just have to survive until then. But surviving turned out to be harder than any of them expected. The character assassination campaign continued relentlessly. New articles appeared every week, each one adding fresh concerns about Lenora's credibility. Anonymous letters started arriving at the ranch, some threatening violence, others just cruel personal attacks. Someone sent a package containing a dead rat and a note reading, "Liars die choking on their own tongues." The marshals intercepted most of the threats, but the constant barrage wore everyone down. Lenora stopped reading newspapers altogether. She threw herself into ranch work with manic intensity, spending 14-hour days doing anything physical enough to exhaust her into sleep. Coulter watched her unravel slowly and didn't know how to stop it. "She's breaking," he told Wade one night in the barn. "All this waiting, all the attacks, it's destroying her piece by piece." "Then you better find a way to put her back together," Wade said bluntly, "because if she falls apart before the trial, Voss wins without ever setting foot in a courtroom." Coulter found Lenora that night sitting in Ash's stall, her back against the wall, staring at nothing. "Hey," he said softly, sitting beside her. "You okay? Do I look okay?" "No, you look like you're about to break." She laughed, brittle and sharp. "Perceptive. Talk to me." "About what? About how I thought doing the right thing would matter? About how I believed justice actually existed?" Lenora's voice rose slightly. "I've sacrificed 3 years of my life to this, watched people die for it, dragged you and your ranch into a war you never asked for. And for what? So Voss can buy newspapers to call me a whore and make jurors think I'm lying? You're not lying. I know that. You know that. But will a jury believe it after months of reading that I'm a vengeful woman with questionable morals?" She dropped her head into her hands. "Maybe I should have just taken the settlement, $100,000, and this all goes away." "You don't mean that." "Don't I? What if we lose, Coulter? What if we go through all of this and Voss walks away free? What then?" Coulter took her hands, pulling them away from her face so she had to look at him. "Then we tried. We stood up to a man who thought he was untouchable and proved he could be challenged. That matters even if we lose." "Easy to say when it's not your reputation being destroyed." "It is my reputation. You think those articles don't mention me? Coulter Hayes, the gullible rancher manipulated by a scheming woman. They're attacking both of us, Lenora, trying to make us turn on each other or give up, and I'm not giving them that satisfaction." She stared at him, tears finally spilling over. "I'm so tired." "I know." He pulled her close, letting her cry against his chest. "But we're almost there. 3 months. Then the trial happens and we finally get to fight back with everything we have. You just need to hold on a little longer." "I don't know if I can." "Yes, you can. Because you're the woman who walked into a killer's corral unarmed. The woman who stole evidence from murderers. The woman who looked Edmund Voss in the eye and promised to destroy him." Coulter tilted her face up. "That woman doesn't quit. Not now. Not ever." Lenora kissed him then, desperate and fierce, like she needed the contact to remember who she was. They stayed in the barn for a long time, holding each other while Ash dozed nearby and the winter night pressed cold against the walls. When they finally went back to the house, Lenora seemed steadier. Not healed, this kind of damage didn't heal quickly, but strong enough to face another day. March arrived with unexpected warmth, melting snow and turning the roads to mud. The trial date loomed closer. Webb sent regular updates about jury selection strategies and witness preparation. The 8 families were secured in safe locations, ready to testify. Everything was falling into place. Then, 2 weeks before trial, Jacob Thorne sent an urgent telegram. "Accountant willing to testify against Voss. Devastating evidence. Can prove entire fraud scheme. Need immediate protection." The accountant's name was William Fletcher. According to Thorne's follow-up letter, Fletcher had worked for Voss Development for 8 years, managing the books and handling financial transactions for the fraudulent land acquisitions. He'd kept meticulous records of everything, every bribe paid, every forged document commissioned, every illegal transaction. And now, facing his own potential prosecution, He was willing to trade testimony for immunity. "This is it," Webb said when they met to discuss the development. "Fletcher's testimony combined with your documents and the victim statements, Voss can't survive that. His lawyers will try to discredit Fletcher, but the financial records don't lie." "Where is he now?" Coulter asked. "Protective custody in Denver. Federal marshals are guarding him until trial. They're bringing him to the courthouse the day of testimony." "Is that safe, moving him at all?" "Safer than leaving him in one location where Voss's people could plan an extraction. They'll move him in a closed wagon with armed escort. He'll be fine." But nothing about this case had been fine so far, and Coulter couldn't shake the feeling that Voss had one more play left, something desperate and violent enough to stop the trial from ever happening. He just didn't know what it was yet. The week before trial, Coulter married Lenora in a quiet ceremony in the ranch house with only Wade, Dutch, and the federal marshals as witnesses. It wasn't the wedding either of them had imagined. No guests, no celebration, no joy beyond the simple fact of saying vows and meaning them. "I do," Lenora said, her voice steady for the first time in weeks. "I do," Coulter echoed, and slid a simple gold band onto her finger. They kissed while the marshals clapped politely, and Wade whistled loud enough to make everyone wince. "Well," Lenora said afterward, staring at her ring, "that's done." "Romantic," Coulter said dryly. "Practical. If something happens to me at trial, at least you'll have legal standing to continue the case as my spouse." "Nothing's going to happen to you." "You don't know that." "No," Coulter agreed, "but I'm choosing to believe it anyway." They spent their wedding night in the ranch house bedroom, holding each other and talking about what came after the trial, the life they'd build if they survived, the ranch they'd run together, the future that felt impossibly distant but worth fighting for. When morning came, they packed for the journey to the territorial capital where the trial would be held. 3 federal marshals, 2 lawyers, 8 witness families gathering from across the territories, 1 accountant ready to betray his former employer, and 2 people who'd started this whole war with nothing but stolen documents and stubborn refusal to surrender. The trial was finally here, and Edmund Voss was waiting. The territorial capital was bigger than any place Lenora had seen since leaving Denver. Brick buildings stacked 3 and 4 stories high, streets paved with cobblestone instead of dirt, people everywhere moving with the kind of purposeful energy that came from lives built on commerce instead of survival. It made her feel exposed, vulnerable, like every face in the crowd might belong to one of Voss's hired killers. The marshals secured them in a hotel 2 blocks from the courthouse, taking over an entire floor and posting guards at every entrance. Caroline Webb arrived the same day with Marcus Stone and the 3rd lawyer, a younger man named Harrison who specialized in financial crimes. They set up a makeshift war room in one of the hotel suites, covering every surface with documents, witness statements, and legal briefs. "Jury selection starts tomorrow," Webb said, spreading out a list of potential jurors. "We need to eliminate anyone with financial ties to Voss or his associates, anyone who's expressed anti-settlement sentiment, and anyone who might be swayed by the character assassination campaign." "That's going to be almost everyone," Lenora said tiredly. "The newspapers have been running those stories for 2 months." "Not everyone reads newspapers, and not everyone believes what they read." Stone tapped the list with a scarred finger. "We're looking for working people, farmers, laborers, shopkeepers, people who've been on the wrong end of power and might sympathize with victims over wealthy businessmen. People like the families Voss destroyed," Coulter added. "Exactly." Webb made notes in the margins. "We also need to prepare you for testimony, Lenora. Voss's lawyers will try to rattle you, make you angry, get you to say something impulsive they can use against you. You need to stay calm no matter what they throw at you." "I can do calm." "Can you?" Stone's expression was skeptical. "Because I saw you confront Voss in the courthouse hallway, and calm isn't the word I'd use to describe it." Lenora bristled. "He was threatening us. I wasn't going to just stand there and take it. In the hallway, that's fine. On the witness stand, it'll destroy our case." Stone leaned forward. "Everything you say will be reported in newspapers across the territories. Every expression, every reaction, every moment of visible emotion will be analyzed and used either for or against us. You need to be composed, credible, and unshakable. So basically, don't be human. Basically, be the best version of human, the one who's telling the truth and knows it." Webb's voice softened slightly. I know it's hard, but this is the most important performance of your life. They drilled her for hours. Webb playing prosecutor, Stone playing defense attorney, Harrison throwing unexpected questions designed to provoke emotional responses. By the time they finished, Lenora felt hollowed out and brittle. Coulter found her later on the hotel room balcony, staring at the city lights. You did good in there, he said. I froze twice, snapped at Stone, nearly cried when Harrison asked about my father. And by tomorrow you'll do better, and the day after that, better still. He stood beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. You don't have to be perfect, Lenora, just real. Stone said real isn't good enough. Stone's wrong. Juries don't trust perfect. They trust honest. Coulter turned to face her fully. Tell the truth the way you told it to me that first night in the barn. Clear, direct, angry about what happened, but focused on the facts. That's all you need. She wanted to believe him, wanted to think that truth alone would be enough to overcome Voss's money and lawyers and carefully constructed lies. But she'd seen too much of how the world actually worked to have that kind of faith. Jury selection took 3 grinding days. Voss's lawyers challenged anyone who seemed sympathetic to the victims. Webb and her team challenged anyone with obvious financial connections to development companies or political ties to territorial officials. The final jury, 12 men and women ranging from a blacksmith to a schoolteacher to a widow who ran a boarding house, looked exhausted before the trial even started. Judge Blackwood addressed them sternly. You are about to hear testimony regarding serious allegations of fraud, bribery, and corruption. Your job is to evaluate the evidence presented and determine the facts of the case. Nothing more, nothing less. I expect you to put aside any preconceptions and judge based solely on what you hear in this courtroom. The opening statements began that afternoon. Dennison, Voss's lead attorney, spoke first. He was smooth, practiced, hitting every note with precision. Voss Development was a legitimate enterprise bringing progress to the frontier. Miss Vance was a disgruntled former employee seeking revenge for being terminated. The evidence had been obtained through theft and couldn't be trusted. The witness families were unfortunate victims of economic hardship, but their losses weren't the result of fraud, just the harsh realities of frontier life. It was compelling in a slick, rehearsed way that made Lenora's stomach turn. Then Webb stood up. She didn't have Dennison's polish. Her suit was slightly wrinkled, her hair pulled back in a simple bun, her voice carrying the rough edges of someone who'd spent more time in frontier courtrooms than fancy Denver offices. But what she had was conviction. Members of the jury, this case is simple. Edmund Voss and his associates stole land from 17 families through forged documents and bribed officials. They profited enormously while destroying lives. And when one brave woman exposed their crimes, they tried to silence her through intimidation, bribery, and violence. Webb walked to the evidence table and held up a ledger. This is Mr. Voss's own handwriting documenting bribes paid to a territorial judge. This is a forged deed used to steal 160 acres from the Henderson family. This is correspondence proving systematic fraud across 3 territories. She set the documents down carefully. Over the next several weeks, you'll hear from 8 families who lost everything. You'll hear from an accountant who kept records of every illegal transaction. And you'll hear from Miss Vance, who risked her life to bring this evidence forward. Webb paused, making eye contact with each juror. The defense will try to make this complicated. They'll attack Miss Vance's character. They'll claim the evidence is tainted. They'll suggest these families are simply unlucky rather than victims of deliberate fraud. But don't let them confuse you. This is about powerful men stealing from ordinary people and thinking they'd never face consequences. Your verdict will determine whether they were right. She sat down. The courtroom was silent. Then Blackwood called the first witness. The Henderson family testified together, husband and wife taking turns describing how they'd worked their land for 6 years before Voss's company appeared with documents claiming prior ownership. How the judge had ruled against them despite clear evidence their deed was legitimate. How they'd lost everything and had to start over with nothing. Mrs. Henderson's voice shook when she described telling their children they'd have to leave the only home they'd known. Dennison's cross-examination was brutal. He implied they'd mismanaged their finances, suggested they were looking for someone to blame for their own failures, asked invasive questions about their debts and personal lives. But Mrs. Henderson didn't break. She answered each question calmly, always circling back to the central truth. They'd owned the land legally, and Voss had stolen it through fraud. The Bishop family testified next. Then the Rodriguezes, with an interpreter helping when Mr. Rodriguez's English faltered. Then Samuel Cross, the blacksmith, describing how he'd built a successful farm only to watch it get seized by men with forged paperwork. Each story reinforced the pattern. Each testimony added weight to the case. But Voss's lawyers chipped away at details, planting doubt wherever they could. Timelines that didn't quite match, documents that seemed ambiguous, suggestions that these families had simply misunderstood legal processes they weren't educated enough to navigate properly. By the end of the second week, Lenore couldn't tell if they were winning or losing. Then William Fletcher took the stand. The accountant was a small, nervous man in his 40s with thinning hair and hands that wouldn't stay still. He looked terrified, sitting in front of the packed courtroom, his eyes darting to Voss and then away like he expected to be struck down where he sat. Webb approached him gently. "Mr. Fletcher, how long did you work for Voss Development?" 8 years. Started as a junior bookkeeper, eventually became chief accountant. And in that role, what were your responsibilities? Managing financial records, processing transactions, maintaining ledgers for all company operations. Fletcher's voice was barely audible. The judge had to ask him twice to speak up. Did those operations include the land acquisitions we've been discussing in this trial? Yes. Can you describe how those acquisitions were processed? Fletcher took a shaky breath. Mr. Voss would identify properties he wanted. Then he'd have his lawyers create shell companies, fake businesses that existed only on paper. Those companies would file forged deeds claiming they'd owned the land before the current occupants. When families tried to fight it, Mr. Voss would pay judges and county clerks to rule in his favor or make the legitimate deeds disappear from official records. And you have documentation of these payments? Yes. I kept duplicate records of every transaction, every bribe, every forged document commission, every illegal payment. It's all in the ledgers Miss Vance stole from the office. Dennison shot to his feet. Objection! The witness just admitted the evidence was stolen. The evidence was obtained by Miss Vance during the course of her legitimate employment, Webb countered. She had access to those files as part of her clerical duties. Overruled, Blackwood said. Continue, Mr. Fletcher. For the next 3 hours, Fletcher walked the jury through the fraud scheme in excruciating detail. Names, dates, amounts paid, which officials were bribed, how the shell companies were structured, the exact process used to forge documents that would pass cursory inspection. It was devastating testimony. Dennison tried to shake him during cross-examination, suggesting Fletcher was lying to secure immunity for his own crimes. But Fletcher had too much documentation, too many specific details that matched the physical evidence. His testimony wasn't opinion or memory, it was a roadmap through Voss's criminal enterprise, drawn by the man who'd helped operate it. When Fletcher finally stepped down, he looked smaller somehow, lighter, like confessing had removed weight he'd been carrying for years. That night, Webb allowed herself a cautious smile. Fletcher buried him. Between the documentary evidence and that testimony, Voss's defense is collapsing. They'll still attack Lenora, Stone warned. It's their only move left. Discredit the source of the evidence, plant enough doubt to give the jury an excuse to acquit. Then we make sure her testimony is unimpeachable, Webb said, looking at Lenora seriously. You're up tomorrow. Everything we've built comes down to whether the jury believes you. Lenora didn't sleep that night. She lay beside Coulter in the hotel room, staring at the ceiling and rehearsing answers to questions she'd been asked 100 times in preparation. You're going to do fine, Coulter murmured in the darkness. You don't know that. I know you've survived everything Voss threw at you for 3 years. I know you convinced 8 families to risk everything on this case. I know you faced down 13 armed riders with nothing but a bluff. He rolled over to face her. You're the strongest person I've ever met, Lenora. Tomorrow, all you have to do is let the jury see that. She kissed him, trying to draw strength from the contact. What if it's not enough? Then we'll figure out what comes next together. But I'm betting it will be. Morning came too fast. Lenora dressed carefully in a simple dress Webb had chosen, modest, respectable, nothing that would distract from her testimony. She braided her hair the way she had that first day riding into Hayes Ranch, when she'd been terrified and desperate but determined to prove herself anyway. That woman had survived. This one would too. The courtroom was packed when they arrived. Every seat filled, people standing in the back, reporters scribbling notes before testimony even started. Lenora felt their eyes on her, judging, assessing, deciding whether she looked like someone who'd tell the truth or someone who'd lie for revenge. Webb called her to the stand. The oath felt surreal. Promising to tell the truth under penalty of perjury, knowing her whole future hung on whether 12 strangers believed her words. Webb started with easy questions. Background, education, why she'd taken the job at Voss Development, building credibility through simple facts before moving to the harder testimony. Miss Vance, when did you first realize Voss Development was engaged in fraud? About 3 months into working there, I was filing correspondence and noticed letters discussing payments to county clerks that didn't match any legitimate business purpose. When I started paying closer attention, I saw the pattern: fake companies, forged documents, bribes disguised as consulting fees. What did you do with this information? At first, nothing. I was terrified. These were powerful men, and I was just a clerk. But then I learned my family's ranch had been stolen using the same methods. My father died trying to fight it legally, and my mother lost everything. Lenora's voice stayed steady. That's when I decided to act. I started making copies of documents whenever I could. Ledgers, correspondence, deeds, anything that proved the fraud. And you did this for how long? 8 months. Building a comprehensive file on 17 separate fraud cases. Then I learned Voss's security was getting suspicious, so I took everything and ran. Webb walked her through the evidence piece by piece, each document, what it proved, how it connected to the larger pattern. Lenora answered clearly, referencing specific dates and details without hesitation. Then Dennison stood for cross-examination, and everything got harder. Miss Vance, you claim you worked for Voss Development under your real name, but we have employment records showing you were hired as Nora Vincent. Isn't that correct? I used a shortened version of my name, yes. Lenora became Nora. Vance became Vincent. It's not uncommon for women to... But you did use a false name. You were deceptive from the start. I was cautious. There's a difference. Is there? Dennison smiled coldly. You were also romantically involved with a supervisor at Voss Development, weren't you? A man named Thomas Garrett? Lenora's stomach dropped. No, I was never... We have testimony from 3 employees who witnessed you having dinner with Mr. Garrett on multiple occasions, having intimate conversations, leaving together in the evenings. That's not... We worked late sometimes. We'd eat at the same restaurant nearby. That doesn't mean we were involved. Lenora fought to keep her voice level. This is exactly the kind of character assassination you've been running in newspapers for months. Objection, Webb called. Counsel is testifying rather than questioning. Sustained, Mr. Dennison. Ask questions or sit down. Dennison shifted tactics. Miss Vance, you've testified that your father died fighting Voss's fraud. Isn't it true he died in a riding accident? An accident Voss's men caused by sabotaging. A simple yes or no, please. Did your father die in a riding accident? Yes, but... And isn't it true you blamed Voss Development for this accident despite no evidence of foul play? There was evidence. There were witnesses who saw... Witnesses who were never part of any official investigation. Witnesses who only you claim existed. Dennison's voice rose slightly. Miss Vance, isn't it true that you've been obsessed with revenge against Edmund Voss since your father's death? That this entire case is about your personal vendetta rather than actual fraud? No. This is about justice for 17 families. Families you convinced to testify through manipulation and false promises. Families whose lives you further destroyed by dragging them into a legal battle they can't win. That's not true, isn't it? How many of these families have lost additional money on legal fees? How many have been subjected to public scrutiny and character assassination because you convinced them to follow your revenge scheme? Lenora's hands clenched on the witness stand. She could feel herself getting angry, losing the composure Stone had drilled into her. But Dennison's implications were so wrong, so deliberately twisted, that staying calm felt impossible. She took a breath, forced herself to think instead of react. Mr. Dennison, she said slowly, you're asking me if I blame myself for Voss continuing to attack people after they agreed to testify against him. The answer is no. I blame Voss. He's the one who stole from these families.
He's the one who spent months trying to intimidate and silence them. I didn't create this situation. I'm just the only one who had the evidence and courage to expose it. Courage or recklessness? Courage, because recklessness would have been running away and letting Voss keep destroying lives. Lenora met Dennison's eyes steadily. I spent 3 years running and hiding. The easiest thing in the world would have been to destroy the evidence, disappear, and let powerful men keep being powerful. But that would have meant the Hendersons never get their land back. The Bishops never see justice for what they lost. Thomas Pratt died for nothing. Thomas Pratt died because
Edmund Voss had him killed for trying to fight back. Lenora's voice rose despite her best efforts. Just like he's tried to kill me. Just like he'll keep killing anyone who threatens his criminal enterprise until someone finally stops him. Your Honor, the witness is making unsubstantiated accusations. They're substantiated by documentary evidence and witness testimony you've spent 3 weeks trying to discredit. Lenora stood, ignoring Webb's warning gesture. You want to know why I did this? Why I risked everything? Because someone had to. Because 17 families deserved better than watching their lives get stolen while the system that was supposed to protect them did nothing. Because I was tired of being afraid and powerless while men like Edmund Voss did whatever they wanted. The courtroom had gone silent. Dennison opened his mouth, then closed it again, visibly calculating whether pushing further would help or hurt. No further questions, he said finally. Lenora sat down, her heart hammering. She'd lost her composure, gotten emotional, done exactly what Stone said would destroy their case. But when she looked at the jury, she didn't see judgment. She saw recognition, understanding, like she'd finally said something that mattered more than perfect testimony. Webb rested the prosecution's case that afternoon. Voss's defense lasted 2 days. They called character witnesses who claimed he was a respected businessman and philanthropist, financial experts who suggested the ledgers could have been misinterpreted, a handwriting analyst who raised questions about whether the signatures on certain documents were actually Voss's. It was all smoke and mirrors, attempts to create doubt without addressing the overwhelming evidence. Then Voss himself took the stand. He was polished, controlled, playing the role of wronged businessman perfectly. He claimed to have had no knowledge of any fraud, suggested that if crimes had been committed, they were done by rogue employees without his approval. Expressed sympathy for the families who'd lost land while maintaining he bore no responsibility for their situations. It was a masterful performance, and it might have worked if Fletcher hadn't already testified about Voss personally approving every bribe and forged document. Webb's cross-examination was surgical. She walked Voss through the ledgers line by line, asking him to explain entries that Fletcher had already described in detail, showed him correspondence with his signature directing illegal activities, confronted him with evidence that directly contradicted his claims of ignorance. By the time Webb finished, Voss's composure had cracked. His answers had gotten defensive, contradictory. He looked less like a respectable businessman and more like a cornered criminal. The closing arguments happened on a Friday morning 3 weeks after the trial began. Dennison went first, making a last desperate attempt to reframe the case. This was about a vengeful woman and her tragic crusade, about unfortunate economic circumstances mischaracterized as deliberate fraud, about rushing to judgment against a man who'd brought progress and development to the frontier. Then Webb stood. She didn't raise her voice, didn't need to. She simply laid out the evidence step by step, piece by piece, building an inescapable conclusion. Members of the jury, this case is about accountability. Edmund Voss committed crimes thinking his wealth and power would protect him. He destroyed families thinking nobody would care enough to fight back. He bribed officials thinking the system would shield him from consequences. Webb paused. But one woman cared enough. Lenora Vance walked into that office, documented every crime, and risked her life to make sure you would hear the truth. 8 families found the courage to testify, despite knowing what it might cost them. An accountant chose his conscience over his comfort, and now it comes down to you. She looked at each juror in turn. You have the evidence, you have the testimony, you have the power to send a message that power and wealth don't put anyone above the law. I'm asking you to deliver justice for 17 families who lost everything, for Thomas Pratt and his wife and child, who died trying to fight back, for everyone who's ever been powerless against someone stronger and richer. Webb returned to her seat, This is your chance to prove that courage and truth matter more than money. Don't waste it. The jury deliberated for 2.5 days. Lenore and Coulter stayed in the hotel, trying not to think about what it meant that they were taking so long. Webb said it was normal, that complex cases required careful consideration. Stone said a quick verdict would have meant acquittal, so the delay was actually encouraging. Neither explanation helped. On the afternoon of the third day, word came that the jury had reached a verdict. The courtroom filled faster than Lenora thought possible. Every seat taken, people pressed against walls, marshals having to control the crowd pushing in from the hallway. The air felt electric, charged with anticipation that made breathing difficult. The jury filed in. Lenora tried to read their faces and couldn't. They looked exhausted, serious, resolved. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Blackwood asked. "We have, Your Honor," the foreman said. He was the blacksmith, a man whose hands understood hard work and honest labor. "On the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud, how do you find?" "Guilty." The courtroom erupted. Blackwood's gavel cracked like thunder, demanding order. "On the charge of bribery of public officials?" "Guilty." More shouting. Lenora felt Coulter's hand find hers, squeezing so tight it hurt. "On the charge of forgery and falsification of legal documents?" "Guilty." Voss sat frozen at the defense table, his face drained of color. The foreman read through 17 separate counts of fraud, one for each family. "Guilty. Guilty. Guilty." When he finished, Blackwood looked at Voss with an expression of barely contained disgust. "Mr. Voss, you have been found guilty on all counts. Sentencing will occur in 2 weeks. But I want you to understand something before you leave this courtroom. You used your wealth and position to steal from hardworking people. You corrupted the legal system meant to protect them. You ordered violence against anyone who threatened to expose you. And you did all of it believing you were untouchable." The judge's voice hardened. "You were wrong, and I will ensure your sentence reflects the magnitude of your crimes." The marshals led Voss away in chains. He didn't look at Lenore as he passed, didn't acknowledge the families he'd destroyed, just walked out with his shoulders slumped and his expensive suit looking like a costume he could finally take off. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Questions flew from every direction. Lenora let Webb handle most of them, still too stunned to process what had just happened. They'd won. Actually won. The celebration that night was quiet and private. Just Lenora, Coulter, Webb, Stone, and the witness families gathered in a restaurant that had closed early to accommodate them. There was food and drink and tears and laughter, everyone processing the victory in their own way. Mrs. Henderson hugged Lenora so tight she could barely breathe. "Thank you. For not giving up. For believing this mattered." "You're the ones who testified," Lenora said. "You're the ones who stood up when it would have been safer to stay silent. You gave us the courage to do it," Mr. Bishop said. "You showed us that fighting back was possible." Samuel Cross raised a glass. "To Lenora Vance, the woman stubborn enough to take down Edmund Voss." Everyone drank to that, then to justice, then to the families finally getting their land back, then to new beginnings and second chances, and proving that ordinary people could challenge power and win. Later, when the celebration had wound down and people started drifting back to their hotels, Lenore and Coulter walked through the city streets under stars that seemed brighter than they had any right to be. "What happens now?" Lenora asked. "Now we wait for sentencing. Then the civil case continues, getting the land actually returned to the families. Then we start dealing with all the corrupt officials Voss bribed. Then," Coulter smiled, "then we probably find something else to fight about, because neither of us is good at staying quiet when things are wrong." "Sounds exhausting. Sounds like life." He pulled her close. "But first we go home. Back to the ranch. Back to normal work and normal problems and normal days where nobody's trying to kill us. I don't even remember what normal feels like. Then we'll figure it out together." They returned to Hayes Ranch a week later after Voss's sentencing, 25 years in territorial prison with no possibility of early release. Additional criminal investigations were ongoing for the officials he'd bribed. The civil case was proceeding to return the land to all 17 families. The ranch looked the same as when they'd left. Weathered buildings, muddy yards, horses in the pasture. But riding up to it now felt different, like coming home instead of just returning to a place. Wade met them at the gate, grinning wide enough to split his face. "Heard you won." "We won," Coulter confirmed. Hell of a thing, taking down someone like Voss. Wade shook Coulter's hand, then Lenora's. Proud of you both. Dutch and the other hands had prepared a meal, tough beef, lumpy potatoes, gravy that wasn't quite right. It was perfect. That night, Lenora found herself in the barn with Ash, the stallion greeting her with obvious joy. She brushed him down while Coulter watched from the doorway. You thinking about what comes next? He asked. Thinking about what came before. How I showed up here terrified and desperate, willing to do anything to earn a place to hide. She ran her hand along Ash's neck. I thought survival was enough. Thought if I could just stay alive long enough to expose Voss, that would be victory.
But it wasn't? It was. Just not the way I expected. Lenora turned to face him. I came here running from something. I stayed because I found something worth running toward. The ranch?
The ranch, the fight, you.
She crossed to him, close enough to see the emotion in his eyes. I spent 3 years alone, convinced I had to carry everything myself. Convinced asking for help was weakness. But you and Wade and Dutch and all those families, you showed me that real strength isn't doing it alone. It's trusting other people enough to fight beside you. Coulter pulled her into his arms. For what it's worth, you taught me something too. What's that?
That some things are worth risking everything for. I built this ranch trying to create something safe and isolated, somewhere I could control and protect. But safe isn't the same as meaningful. He kissed her forehead. Fighting alongside you, taking on Voss, standing up for those families, that mattered in a way just running a ranch never did. They stood there holding each other while Ash dozed nearby, and the ranch settled into evening quiet. The land returned to the families over the following months. The Hendersons reclaimed their 160 acres and immediately started rebuilding. The Bishops got their homestead back and planted crops that would harvest by fall. The Rodriguez family returned to land they'd thought lost forever, weeping when they crossed the property line. Not all the stories ended perfectly. Some families had moved on and couldn't return. Some land had been developed in ways that couldn't be easily undone. Some wounds were too deep to fully heal just because a court said justice had been served. But it was better. Measurably, undeniably better than it had been. Lenora traveled to each family personally, helping them navigate the legal process of reclaiming their property. Coulter went with her when he could, Wade managing the ranch when he couldn't. It took almost a year to settle everything, but by the following spring, every family that wanted their land back had it. The territorial investigation into corrupt officials resulted in 14 prosecutions. 3 judges were removed from the bench. County clerks and land office managers were replaced. The system didn't magically become perfect. Corruption ran too deep for that. But it got better. People started believing that challenging power was possible, and that belief changed things. Lenore kept copies of all the evidence in a safe at Hayes Ranch, just in case. But she didn't spend her days obsessing over it anymore. Didn't watch the roads for killers or wake up expecting violence. She just lived. She worked the ranch alongside Coulter, gentling horses and managing livestock, and doing 100 small tasks that added up to a life. She wrote letters to the families, checking in, offering support when legal complications arose. She testified twice more in prosecutions of officials Voss had bribed, her credibility now established enough that defense attorneys couldn't shake her. And slowly, the woman who'd arrived at Hayes Ranch, running from everything, became someone who was running toward something instead. 2 years after the trial, Lenora stood in the same barn where she'd first tamed Ash, watching Coulter work with a young mare that had come in wild from the mountains. He was using the same patience she'd shown that first day. No force, just understanding and time. "You're getting soft," she called out. "Old Coulter would have used a breaking saddle and raw determination." "Old Coulter was an idiot," he shot back, grinning. "This way works better." "I taught you well." "You taught me a lot of things." He got the mare settled and walked over to where Lenora stood. Like how to fight for what matters. How to trust people even when it's scary. How to build something meaningful instead of just something safe. Lenora leaned against him, comfortable in a way that had taken time to learn. "You think we did the right thing? Going after Voss? All the danger, all the violence. Was it worth it? You asking because you're having doubts?" "Asking because sometimes I still wake up thinking about Thomas Pratt and his family. About the men who died attacking the ranch. About everyone who got hurt because I wouldn't let go of stolen documents. Coulter was quiet for a moment, considering seriously. I think we did the only thing we could live with. Voss was going to keep destroying people regardless of whether you fought back. At least this way, some of them got justice. At least we proved that fighting back was possible. Even if it cost lives? Even then, because the alternative, letting powerful people steal and kill without consequences, that costs lives too, just slower, more quietly, in ways people don't see or remember. He turned her to face him. You gave 17 families their land back. You put a criminal in prison. You showed ordinary people that the system could work if they were brave enough to make it work. That's not nothing, Lenora. She nodded slowly. I know. Most days I know. But some days I just wish it hadn't been so hard. Yeah, me too. They stood together watching the sun set through the barn doors, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and gold. You ever regret posting that advertisement? Lenora asked. Looking for a wife and getting a war instead? Every day, Coulter said, deadpan. Then he smiled. No, not once. You're the best thing that ever happened to this ranch. To me. Even though I brought armed riders and legal battles and constant danger, especially because of that. Turns out I was built for fighting alongside someone worth fighting for. He kissed her, slow and thorough. Besides, life's too short for boring. Lenora laughed against his mouth. Boring sounds nice sometimes. Liar, you'd be bored within a week. He was probably right. She'd spent so long running and fighting that peace felt strange, like a coat that didn't quite fit. But she was learning to appreciate quiet mornings and routine work, and days where the biggest drama was a stubborn horse or a fence needing repair. Learning that surviving wasn't the same as living, and living meant building something that mattered. The Hayes Ranch grew over the years. They took on more hands, expanded the herds, built a reputation for training horses that other ranches couldn't handle. People started calling it the place where impossible animals became reliable, where wild things learned to trust without being broken. It seemed fitting somehow. Lenora never forgot what she'd survived to get there. Never forgot the families who'd stood beside her or the people who'd died fighting Voss's violence. She kept their stories alive, telling them to anyone who'd listen, making sure the next generation knew that justice wasn't something that just happened. It was something people fought for, risked for, sometimes died for. But she also learned to let go of the guilt, to accept that she'd done the best she could with impossible choices and that beating herself up over what couldn't be changed helped nobody. She learned to be happy, not perfectly, not constantly, but in the way humans actually are happy, in moments, in small joys, in the satisfaction of work well done and lives well lived. And on cold nights when Coulter held her close and asked if she was okay, Lenora could honestly say yes. Because she'd stopped running from the past and started building a future. Because she'd found people worth trusting and causes worth fighting for. Because she'd learned that courage wasn't about being unafraid, it was about being terrified and doing what mattered anyway. And because she'd discovered that the woman who rode into Hayes Ranch that first day, desperate, dangerous, determined, had always been strong enough to survive what came next. She'd just needed the right partner to remind her of it. Years later, when reporters occasionally asked Lenora about the Voss case and what it had meant, she always gave the same answer. It meant that ordinary people can challenge power if they're brave enough, that the system can work if you're stubborn enough to make it work, and that sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to accept injustice just because everyone says you can't change it. Then she'd smile and add, also, if you're going to start a war against corrupt businessmen, make sure you've got a good rancher watching your back. Makes all the difference. The story of the woman who'd brought down Edmund Voss became legend across the territories. People told it in saloons and around campfires, adding embellishments and drama until the truth became almost unrecognizable. But Lenora didn't mind, because the core of it remained true. She'd fought back when it would have been easier to surrender, and she'd won against odds that should have crushed her. And that truth mattered more than any embellished version ever could. On a spring morning 15 years after that first trial, Lenora stood on the porch of Hayes Ranch watching her and Coulter's daughter, 8 years old, fearless, already better with horses than most adults, work with a nervous colt in the corral. She's got your patience, Coulter said, joining her with coffee. She's got your stubbornness. Poor kid never had a chance. They watched their daughter gentle the colt with the same quiet confidence Lenore had shown with Ash all those years ago. No force, no breaking, just understanding and time. "You think she'll be okay?" Lenora asked. "Growing up with our story hanging over her, everyone knowing what we did? I think she'll be better than okay. She'll grow up knowing that ordinary people can do extraordinary things if they care enough." Coulter squeezed her hand. "She'll know her mother was brave enough to fight an empire and win. That's not a bad legacy." Lenora supposed he was right. The ranch stretched out around them, solid and real, and built on the foundation of everything they'd survived together, the land they'd fought for, the justice they'd won, the life they'd chosen when they could have chosen easier paths. It wasn't perfect. Life never was. But it was theirs, earned through courage and stubbornness, and refusing to surrender when the world said they should. And standing there on the porch with Coulter beside her, and their daughter working in the corral, and the whole wide frontier spreading out under endless sky, Lenora finally understood something important. Survival had never been the goal. Building something worth surviving for, that was the point. And they'd done exactly that.